Jeffrey Epstein was a sick. You have to look objectively as to how something like this happened when you're someone that sick, though, and you have to realize he, for a long time, was an effective spy because he knew all he had to do was get around you, take some pictures, shake some hands, and you were dirty forever because he knew how dirty he was. I think the truth that is really hard for a lot of us, including myself, to swallow is that this kind of thing is something that happens around the world and many intelligence agencies, including our own. The world is just run by underground operations that espionage agencies around the world run on each other, and everything that happens up above ground is just collateral damage. Mike, here's how I'd put it.
When hunting isn't about hunting at all. Team Dog features comprehensive and customizable meal plans with dry and raw food options to meet your dog's unique nutritional needs, including digestive sensitivities, allergies, or selective eating. Did you know combining 75% dry food with 25% raw food delivers robust, nutrient-dense meals for your dog? Be your dog's hero with Team Dog. All right, guys, just wrapped up a 4.5 hour-ish show with a good friend Julian Dorey, which I've been on his show. He's interviewed a lot of really interesting guests, wide swath of experiences with all the different investigative journalistic type interviews that he's done. And we went through the gamut of all of them and talked a lot about some of the current issues and topics that are big in the media right now of guests that he's had on that are subject matter experts, as well as how he got into doing what he does coming from Wall Street. So lots of great insight. I think you guys will enjoy it. And as always, I appreciate the support. Check out the Mic Drop Patreon page and the Team Dog tier within there. And we'll see you guys in the show, and much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He is the host of the wildly successful Julian Dorey Podcast, which I've been a guest on. Now we have him on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Julian Dorey.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Awesome.
I didn't have a smart-ass intro, which I do sometimes. I used to do it with every guest, but sometimes I just want to get right into it. And yeah, I'd love to know what the last full book that you read is. Are you much of a reader?
I am a reader, and before I did the podcast, that's like all I would do. And one of the things I complain about with doing my job now, which I love, but over the last 5.5 years, it's like my time to really sink into a book, unless I schedule that time, is at night, and then the Kindle falls asleep on my face. Yeah. So it takes longer. But I was actually reading on the plane yesterday H.W. Brand's biography of Ben Franklin. And then, what was the other one I was reading? Oh, my God. I just blanked the fuck out. But, yeah, I was reading that on the plane, and I was reading another one the other night. But, I'll jump around a little bit, I'll read a chapter here, chapter there of different books.
Do you have a favorite book or one that you reread regularly?
Oof, that's a great question. I think Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs is great. I think if you're looking at the fictional side of things, a book like The Great Gatsby, or not to be too cliche, but like 1984, are good ones to go back to. I don't know that I've ever read a fictional book more than 2 times, though. Yeah. Great Gatsby I have, but other than that, I like 1984 I read twice. I think Animal Farm, also by Orwell, I read twice. A lot of fictional books, I'll read it, and then that's kind of it. But I like to work in fictional once in a while because, as you might imagine, I lean a lot more towards non-fictional historical stuff with the type of job you and I do. But to kind of reset and escape a little bit and get back into good storytelling, I think that's really good to do. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I almost never read nonfiction. And even when I do, it's like Terminal List. It's something that even though it's nonfiction, it borders on, between who wrote it and the content, it's very realistic.
Right.
I don't really get into. To me, it's almost like cost-benefit analysis, which sounds lame. I mean, I know for most people, fiction is entertainment. It's no different than watching shit on Netflix. But like, if I'm going to take the time to read, I want to get something out of it other than just being entertained. I guess. But
right.
Anything that you wish you were better at?
You're coming right out of the gate here.
Yeah.
There's no warm up. This is like, all right, let's get thinking.
No lube.
I wish I was better at. You know what? I wish I could play the piano really well. When I was a kid, I took classes when I was very young, and no disrespect to the teacher, but it was some like 85-year-old lady having us playing fucking Scherzo No. 9 or whatever. And I'm a huge believer when it comes to creativity. You have to. That's one place where structure is far less important, especially when you're a kid. You need to let kids do the things that they're interested in creatively. Yeah. Now, if you said that about math class, I don't know about that. Like, there has to be structure and other things. But when we're talking about art, whether it be drawing, whether it be playing an instrument or writing something, I don't think you can tell a kid, write about this, draw this, play this music. I think they have to be like, you know what? I'd like to play All the Lights by Kanye West today. And then say like, all right, we're going to learn how to do that. Yeah. And I feel like, because I'm very musically inclined, and like whenever I talk with artists in that space, they're always like, you play stuff? I'm like, no. And they're like, you talk like you do. And it's a big regret, because I'm like, I feel like if I had that kind of outlet to really express my creativity when I was young on that, I probably would have gone into that line of work.
How old are you?
I'm 32.
Still plenty of time.
Still plenty of time. Yeah. Redman was in my studio, and he saw the piano out there. He's like, I'm trying to learn myself right now. I'm like, all right, yeah, I could definitely.
That's got to be weird having a guy like that I imagine you grew up listening to sitting in your fucking studio.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
And he's the coolest guy ever, the most humble guy ever, laid back, does not want anyone to know. Who he is or what he's up to, still lives in the same place he lived in 20 years ago. Yeah, just the coolest guy.
Yeah, that's wild. If time travel were possible, where and when would you go?
I'd probably go to ancient Rome.
Yeah.
It sounds like they had some shit figured out there.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I'm one of those guys when that thing was going viral where they're like, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? I was like, shit, every day, man.
What is it about that period you think that encapsulates so many young men's attention? And do you feel like it's reflective of where we are, I would say, limited in our society in terms of kind of where we're at from a, not status standpoint, but like, architecturally things are boring, music-wise, everything's manufactured. Like, do you think that it's mostly a reflection of kind of where we're not now at this point?
I'm going to come back to the second part and answer the first part. The first one's easy. The second one's a great question. The first part is, I think every kid who saw Russell Crowe turn his head around, say, my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the 4th Army. Like, you see that, you're like, all right, I want to go to Rome. So that's kind of the easy part. There's little memories of that. Like, I remember watching that movie as a child. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, top 5. And it's like, God, that looks awesome. But on the second part of your question, those are some great points. There are a lot of strange parallels, I think, to some of the good and now some of the dangers of Rome. And obviously, like all empires in human history, you're a student of history, like, they all fall at some point. Some last longer than others. Rome lasted a long time, had multiple eras. It had, the Roman scholars would probably yell at me and say I'm getting this wrong, but like, if you really made it broad, it had roughly 3 eras. If you talk like Republic, Empire, and then Holy Roman Empire, to oversimplify it. So it lasted a long time, but it fell in on itself. It wasn't like the enemy came to the gate and suddenly the party was over. It's like when the enemy came to the gate, that party had been over for a while. And I'll admit, I really do look at things optimistically. I do have to be a cynic about certain things in society, but when I look at the long term, I'm a major optimist about society. So I don't want to be biased and say, hey, everything's fine. We're absolutely going to be fine. I think we are. That said, I know you've seen some very strange things happen economically, geopolitically, politically, socially, culturally, to name a few, over the last 25 years in particular. And it hasn't just been any one thing, but, you know, we've definitely had to withstand a lot of being our own worst enemy in this country, I think. And not all of that is over. I think we still have a lot to reckon with there. So yeah, I think there are some parallels to be very wary of with Rome. And then I love your example about art too, and about, you know, kind of the juxtaposition there, because I don't like to generalize everything. Sometimes I'll see some architecture, I'll be like, wow, that's fucking amazing. I was just looking at the architecture for this dinosaur museum in South Jersey. I had this guy, Ken Lacavara, on, who's like one of the best paleontologists of all time, and he founded this place. And it was beautiful. They built this in like the last 10 years. He took a lot of pride in like how they were designing the structure and everything, but you saw something like that, and it wasn't like gaudy, and it didn't have sculptures all over the outside or anything, but it was sleek and magnificent, and not just like a block or something like that, you know. So I think there are pieces of that. And then also when you look at music and art, there's some amazing music and art. But then I'll see an art gallery where some dude, like, you know, pushes over a sandbox, and, you know, the sand falls out and people go, ooh. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't think that would have passed in Rome. That feels like the joke's on us. So there's some weird things where we almost like go so full circle on trying to use our imagination on things that we start to, I don't know, assume something's great that's not. And also, I didn't really say this example, but in music you see that sometimes too. There's certain subgenres within genres now that I'm like, I don't think it's that good. Yeah. But then there's other genres I'm like, that's good.
Do you have a textbook example of that?
I think some of the mumble rap.
Yeah.
Some of the mumble rap is objectively not good. But then I'll listen to an album like, you know, Lil Baby and Durk's album in 21. And you're like, all right, some of this is pretty good. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I try not to let my ears lie to me or my eyes lie to me with things. You know, you can go Google a movie real quick and see what the score was on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, not look at the context and just assume that's right. I don't like assuming that's right to the upside or downside. I like kind of appreciating things as I see them. And a lot of times, you know, it'll line up with some of those gradings. It's just weird when you look at music and things that kind of get, you know, music is background noise, right? It's stuff that's just pumped through the speakers around you. It's your little soundtrack of life. There's things that get pushed sometimes that I'm like, there's no way they think that's good, you know?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I do truly believe that society, generally speaking, is so disconnected from reality that, like, a lot of people don't even know what to think. You know, number one, critical thinking is not an important part of the education system by and large. And so I think growing up being spoon-fed puts you on a path of spending your entire life being spoon-fed. And I think that's why so many junk reality shows are popular.
Yes.
So much really generic vanilla music with not a lot of talent and is overproduced is super popular. And kind of going back to the Rome thing and and to be clear, I also think that, you know, even answering the going back to Rome at its height, not, you know, when it collapsed, right. You know, because I think we're on the precipice of that, and I do think that, or I guess I would say my theory in that one of the biggest reason why, like, even competing in jiu-jitsu or like Tough Mudder or Spartan races, you know, things like that are so popular now is because so many young men never do anything that makes them feel accomplished as a man and like they did something hard. You know, because 50 years ago, none of those things would have, I mean, people would have laughed at that, right? Yeah. You know, whereas now, like, they're super popular. It's like, well, that's dumb as fuck. Why would you do that? You know, it's like, well, because I work at fucking State Farm. It's not a knock on State Farm, but, you know, if you've never done anything hard where you felt like, fuck, my life is in danger, or if I don't overcome this, like, I may lose my fucking legs, or, I mean, whatever. And I really do. I think that that's why, you know, depression is so high, and why I think there's such a movement to seek out discomfort is because life is generally not that uncomfortable. If you look at the broad scope of the human experience, we're in a very unique and uncharted time where, you don't have to find your own food. You don't have to keep yourself warm. Like, you don't even have to pick up your own trash. Like, you can have shit delivered to your house. It's like, if you compare that to the scope of human history, it's weird, and it's really not a wonder, I don't think, why people are so down by comparison. But
it's funny you bring that up, because I on the car ride from the airport yesterday, I don't know why, but I was just like kind of thinking about some of this stuff and trying to put together timelines. And I don't know what you would think of this, but if you look at every era, just even World War II and on, don't even go before then, most eras had some sort of major war, some sort of bad enemy or whatever. And then we get to the 90s, the Cold War ends. The 90s are the greatest decade in human history, as far as I'm concerned, if you really look at that and everything that happened there. And then you get 9/11, and you get the War on Terror, which was a whole new war. There's no draft. Guys like you decide to go in, right? But there was a real sense of patriotism to that. Something bad happened. We got hit here. People are like, fuck that. We're going to go take care of something. And all these young men, think 18 to 25, a lot of them, I shouldn't say all of them, a lot of them were able to feel that kind of calling and feel like they're behind something. And many of them even went to go serve for that. But the reason I was thinking about this is because my era that was coming out, where I graduated college, in 2015, I was coming of age after all that shit happened. And when the economy had crashed, when people thought endless wars were crazy, people started to question the decision makers in America at a rate, I think, at a higher level than probably since Vietnam at that point. And so there wasn't, some of these wars were still going on, but there was far less participation across young men in society, not just in that war actively, but even understanding, that the country's behind these wars or things like that. And so you also had the dawn of social media 2.0 and the iPhone and technology and people sitting under fluorescent lights at a desk. And like you said, working at State Farm and doing these jobs, click, 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 go, go, go. And they don't feel any purpose, so they fill that gap now. And I think it's good that some people are looking to fill that gap with things like the triathlons and the Tough Mudders and working out hard and stuff like that. But it's almost like that national masculinity, if you will, hasn't had a box to put itself in and get shipped off. No pun intended.
No, for sure. I think even with guys who, because I've had, as have you, had a number of combat veterans on the show that have years or even decades of pretty tumultuous experiences and chaotic and traumatic experiences. And, if I were to pinpoint like a singularity of the guys who go through all of that and then struggle with mental issues afterwards, it always, almost like Bob Barker in the Plinko game, like it can bounce around, but it always ends up a lack of purpose, is that there's not something that they're getting out of bed and excited about every morning, and that's the problem, and I think when you couple that with traumatic experiences and life or death situations or whatever, it magnifies depression and suicidal ideation. Yes. and things like that. Not to discount or trivialize people who don't have that and still find themselves depressed. I just think that it magnifies it. And, I think human beings are, by design, intended to struggle and need to overcome something and need a cause to be passionate about. And that's why, when we live in this time where we're, again, compared to, human history, looking in the rearview mirror, it's as easy as it's ever been by a landslide, is why you have, trans rights stuff and, just all these movements, that if you look at, like, even compared to modern day third world countries, like they don't have the luxury of being pissed off about things like that, and I think that that's pretty telling. But I have no doubt we'll get back into that. But continuing through the lightning round, I imagine that in New Jersey you don't or can't carry a pistol. Do you, or are you into guns? Do you have a favorite pistol or any type of EDC that you rock?
Yeah, I like the Danielson AR-15, so it's not a pistol. Yeah. I'm going straight to the bigger stuff. I'm from New Jersey, so when I go out to the gun range and shoot, and they tell you to hold the pistol, they want you to hold it like this and all that. I just want to hold it like that.
Full gangster mode.
Right. It's like, this is how we shoot in New Jersey. So I know a lot of people out there are cringing right now. But then with the AR, it feels much more natural. And you also understand why, like, that's the kind of weapon guys carry around in combat.
Yeah.
Because that thing is literally right on your shoulder at all times. And I'm nice with that. Yeah. I like that.
I'm curious. I mean, for your generation, obviously, it's going to be largely dependent on region because of how difficult it is to own and regularly enjoy or shoot, practice, et cetera, guns in the area that you live versus, say, here. Do you find that your friends, comparative to other generations, are less into firearms than most?
I would have said that a decade ago. Now I almost think it's the opposite. I think people are almost too into them, as far as not the use of them, but to me, like, yes, it is very fun to go to a range, especially with guys who really know what they're doing, where you can learn cool stuff and shoot things. A lot of fun. But like, these are tools, and they're the highest level tools ever, and it's the tool you hope you never have to use. Not on a range, unless you're going into a war zone, in which case you are going to be using it at some point. But like, I always get worried when people over glorify it, because I think they get excited by the power that little thing in your hand gives you. And I have no delusions of grandeur with that. I look at this like this is a very important skill to have if the worst type of scenario happened and I needed to defend my home or something like that. That is why I do want to be a gun owner. I'm not yet, but I think there has to be a level of respect there. And I know every hardcore combat guy I've talked to, you'll talk to guys, and obviously you went into these war zones yourself, and they're like, hey, that was the thing that kept me alive. And there's a relationship with it. And I think that's different. I think that absolutely makes a ton of sense to me. So it's just from like my perspective as a goddamn civilian, it's like, this is what it would be used for. And that's that. But I don't want to, like, when I have kids someday, I don't want to be taking out my guns with my 6-year-old and being like, look how cool daddy is or something. You know what I mean? It's not, there needs to be a level of respect there. But yes, I think it'd be cool if, if I have some sons of 12, 13, you take them on a hunting trip with pros who can teach them the ins and outs. Here's what happens. And also, it does take you back to what you were talking about a couple minutes ago, where you get a little in touch with the fact that, like, this is how people, even not with guns, but with bow and arrows and stuff, had to put food on the table for all of human existence up until very, very recently. And in some cases around the world right now, they still do. I think there's something very primal but evolutionarily cool in learning that type of thing. So I think I would want my kids to do that when they get of age.
Growing up in that area and in your generation, did you find that the stigma, like say in high school, around guns was more negative than positive?
I would say in high school and college it probably was at the time. And that would also line up with what I was saying like a decade ago. I think it was less cool or whatever. But I think COVID really changed a lot of things for people. I've seen that in the wind. Like, there's something about being locked in your home or told you can't leave your home or told you can't do this or told you can't do that enough people, even if they didn't say it out loud, subconsciously woke up like, whoa, that's a lot of power for some asshole in a suit to be wheeled in on me. And so there's something about appreciating that Second Amendment that, that was one thing I was never, to the hardcore Second Amendment people, I guess everyone's liberal, but I was never liberal on that topic. I always believed in the Second Amendment. I did support some stronger background checks on some things, and for some of that, I still do support that, but I get very concerned about the slippery slope with something like that being taken away. So it's that's a tough dance.
Where do you find that middle ground, I guess, from a background check or a gatekeeping mechanism?
Yeah.
Like what do you think makes sense?
So if you're a domestic abuser, convicted, something like that, convicted felon in that line, I think it should be that way. If you're
violent convicted felon?
Yes. If you're a convicted felon for embezzlement and you served your time, I think you should be able to own a gun. Some people get mad when you say that, but I'm like, I'm not worried about Steve in accounting, who might have fucked
What about Julie in HR? She might snap her fucking twig.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think there has to be some common sense, but I also think, and I've said this so many times, when you look at like these school shootings and these mass shootings and stuff like that, yes, they used a gun. Yes, it's not great when a 17-year-old or 15-year-old gets access to even a pistol, let alone an AR-15. But why are we not asking the questions about the fact that a lot of these shooters, not all of them, but a lot of them are on SSRIs and some of these very, very advanced drugs that they seem to be giving out like fucking jelly beans. Everyone just wants to go right to the gun on stuff, and I get it at the instant reaction, but we don't ban cars when someone runs through a parade and runs people over because they're crazy. So there's something about that I feel like is an elephant in the room that now would be the time, by the way. Post-COVID, where people are asking about the excesses of Big Pharma, where they go wrong, where they absolutely do go wrong on things. Like, now would be the time to maybe, rein some of that in.
Yeah. I think, or I guess I'm curious, is if you view or think that there's a possible more sinister, in a manipulative way, motive with politicians, specifically to guns, because you're right, if you look at Big Pharma, even illegal narcotics, people using vehicles to run people over, or for that matter, the murder rate statistics on how many people are murdered with hammers or, any
Right.
type of blunt force object, or your hands, any mechanism outside of firearms, and it dwarfs firearms. Well, I would say especially, and even, or not even, especially if you remove the statistic of suicide, because to me, I don't think that should be included. That's my personal opinion. I don't view taking your life with a firearm as a murder with a firearm. I don't, and that's the biggest number of firearm deaths nationally by a landslide is suicide.
Oh, wow. You know what? That's crazy. I never even thought about how
Yeah,
much
but that part of the statistic gets lumped in every single time.
I agree with you.
Yeah, if you remove that, it's way less than everything outside of firearms. So, but the broader point I'm trying to get to or ask is, that's the one thing that if you look at human history, in very tyrannical dictatorship type nations where genocide and enormous population control mechanisms through genocide have taken place, the step one is disarming, the public. And without doing that, it's such an uphill battle for a dictator to be able to institutionalize that level of control without doing that. And so, to me, it seems as though, and I'm curious if you agree, that there is an undercurrent of using that in particular because of the ramifications that a heavily armed populace poses in terms of a threat to a tyrannical government, that I think that's the biggest reason why there's such a knee-jerk reaction to stuff like school shootings or whatever. When you look at it statistically, it's an anomaly. It is.
It is.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, especially if you look at what's the next, or not even the next, what is the biggest cause of death for high school kids? It's overdose on opioids. And it's not even close, you know. So
they never went to prison either, by the way.
Yeah, you know, so where is the outrage there? There isn't. So, okay, well then why is there such an outrage with firearms? To me, like, I think that's the answer. I can't think of any other reason why that particular mechanism of taking somebody's life would be so gone after in politics other than for that reason.
Yeah, I think it's also, it gets into the psychology of like, if it bleeds, it leads as well. Someone overdoses, they die. It's the same result. It's a horrible thing. But there's something about it where you didn't see someone's head blown off in the middle of the street. You know, you didn't see a bunch of kids gunned down in the middle of math class or whatever. There is a shock element to it that allows the story to be bigger. I make no distinction between death, though. I think if someone dies of an overdose because some doctor prescribed them fucking 40 million opioids because they had a bruise and then they got addicted to stuff, I think that's every bit as tragic. It's all tragic. But to your point, to both of your points, number one, if you start that slippery slope, where do you stop? Extremely valid question.
All right, guys, winter's here, and I've been spending a lot more time indoors, which means more hours on my Helix mattress, which has really changed the way I sleep. Helix sent me my mattress for free, in my honest opinion, and I didn't realize how bad my old mattress was until I switched. I used to wake up stiff, tossing and turning and sweating through the night. Since I moved to Helix, I sleep deeper, I don't wake up with a sore back, and I stay comfortable all night. If you've never bought a mattress online, Helix makes it easy. You take their sleep quiz, and it matches you with the right mattress based on how you sleep. Firm, soft, side sleeper, stomach sleeper, whatever. Ships right to your door, free, and you get 120 nights to try it out, plus a lifetime warranty. Helix is also the most awarded mattress brand, tested and reviewed by outlets like Forbes and Wired. And they ran a study showing 82% of people saw an increase in deep sleep on a Helix. I'm in that group, and I feel it every morning. So here's the deal. Go to helixsleep.com/micdrop for 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/micdrop for 27% off site-wide. Make sure that you enter the show name after checkout so they know that I sent you.
And that's where I argue against myself, like hypocritically, with even some of the background checks and stuff like that. Like, I'll admit, I'm a fucking podcaster. I'm a YouTuber. Like, I don't have the answers to these things, but that does scare me. And then number two, the other variables. And another variable besides, like, you know, what drugs are some of these kids on, or people that are causing death or injury with firearms, like what kinds of things do they have going on? It's like, I was talking with one of my Uber drivers today, Carl, who's from the area. We were talking about schools and like what percentage of property taxes around here go towards education and things like that. And then we were talking about other places that I won't name within the state where that's not the case and what their crime rates and stuff are like. And so, you know, I'm a huge believer that when you create destitute situations that includes a complete lack of good public education or whatever for kids, you are creating the next generation that you allegedly don't want. But if that's what you're doing, do you, whoever those people are, is that what they really want? You know, do they want to see the same statistics coming out of some of these cities? Why are some cities way better than others? With those statistics, I'll bet I could go look at their basic test scores and just start there and see that, oh, okay, they're doing something a little better. You know, that's better than Chicago over here, you know? So there's a lot that you got to ask there. But to your overall point, we've definitely seen a lot over the last 5 years that has moved, I think, a vast majority of society to the right on the Second Amendment issue.
Yeah.
Like, I would say some of my purest liberal friends are pretty strong Second Amendment people now, which is like, whoa.
Yeah, it's surprising. And I think, you know, my biggest argument with the background check as such a kind of blanket or broad statement is two main components, which is number one, who are they? You know, who are the they that are coming up with, if you check this box, you don't get to own a gun? Who makes that decision? And what qualifies them to make that decision? Also, the part two of that is, what level of autonomy do they have to add or subtract from that list of check marks? Because as soon as you give a governing entity the ability to make a list of boxes that if those are checked, you don't get to own a weapon, where does that end? Who's keeping them honest? Who's checking and balancing them to not add, oh, we're going to add these 5 other things now that if you check this box, you also can't you also can't own a gun. You know, to me, like that's an impossible level of authority and power to give any group of people that's not going to be manipulated and taken advantage of at some point. And if there's no ability to take that power back from them, you can't do it. Just plain and simple, because it's going to go off the rails at some point.
Power isn't taken in an 8 o'clock speech from the Oval Office. It's taken in the fine print.
Well, I would say it's given.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
It's far more given than taken. And, you know, we give it away constantly with that. It's just this one thing. You know, it's just background checks. It's just red flag. It's just certain size fucking magazine, whatever. Is again, as soon as you say this group of people can now decide whatever they want, that this disqualifies you from owning a gun, where does it end? And how do you keep them in check? You can't, you know? So, again, I'm sure we'll come back to that too at some point, but I am curious, growing up in New Jersey, it's vastly different from how I grew up, and just the time that I spent there on your show last year, it felt a little bit like a foreign country. I haven't spent a lot of time up there, but I will say that I was ready to come home. But, you know, I've been all over the world, but something about it to me just seemed just very foreign. Not even necessarily in a bad way. I don't mean it to knock New Jersey, but I am curious, what was your childhood like?
I had an amazing childhood. I really, you know, I think people like to just always complain about whatever happened that wasn't in their control or whatever when they were growing up. But all in all, I think it was great. I had parents who were together and are together today, which is, like, in today's society, a huge win. So great for them. And I grew up in South Jersey. So I've lived all over the state in my life, and North Jersey is home and has been home for the most part since I was 22, with that little detour at my parents' house to build the podcast. But yeah, I had an awesome childhood. I grew up in, like, your prototypical suburban South Jersey. I grew up in a town called West Deptford. It's about 10 minutes outside Philadelphia. And I think the great thing about New Jersey is we kind of have a little bit of everything. So, you know, you get exposed to all different types of backgrounds and stuff like that. And I don't know, I guess I always took that for granted, but then you'll see other people, they didn't get to have that experience growing up. And we obviously have a high population density up there. It's different than a lot of places down here for sure. So I only know it, like, through my lens, how I know it, but it was awesome. And being where I am now, you know, I moved up to North Jersey after college, as I said, lived there for 5 years. When the pandemic hit, I came down to South Jersey for 3.5 years, built the podcast there, which I could have never, ever done without my parents. Like, that was, like, the coolest thing ever. My dad was like, use the back room, go for it now. You know what I mean? And
don't leave your shit laying all over the place.
Well, even that, like, I probably did, but you know, like,
how old were you at that point?
I was 26,
yeah,
27, yeah. And it was just one of those things. And so I always think it's, like, as much their channel as it is mine. But, you know, I didn't have any money. I just barely squeezed by for those years to get to a point to where I was monetized. And the fact of the matter is, I could have never afforded rent on, like, a studio or something. That was the first time in my adult life, too, where I wasn't paying rent to live. You know, it's an incredible luxury. But, you know, it was cool because it's almost like I was very locked in for those 3.5 years, and it was what it was, and there was a lot going on. But it was like, you know, a last little respite of, or if that's the proper way to use it, of, like, my childhood, because it was down in South Jersey, and I'm in the old places where I grew up. And yeah, I'm biased, but I do love New Jersey. I don't love everything about all of our legislation, to be clear, but it's a really, a lot of the state, I think, is a really, really good place to raise a family. And you're in the middle of the shit there, you know. If you're in South Jersey, you're by Philly, not too far from D.C., and New York's right up the turnpike. If you're in North Jersey, you're in the metropolis of the coolest city in the world. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Do you see any Mom Donnie parallels or vibes?
Yeah. So,
because your perspective and views are far different.
oh yeah.
But there's obviously and it's not a cheap shot. I'm mostly just busting your balls, but
No, it's a huge concern. Here's how I describe New York City to people. It's like Bill de Blasio was the worst mayor in the history of mayors, and we've had Lori Lightfoot in this country. Like, I'd take Lori over Bill. That is how bad he was. And I remember I went down, as I said, to South Jersey at the beginning of the pandemic. So my last time in New York was February 28th, 2020. The next time I went was January 21st, 2021, height of COVID. Like, I remember getting off the train at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. I had done this a million times in my life. And you walked out of Penn Station, pin drop. You know, little rats scurrying. Like, not even like the buildings were falling apart or anything. They all looked fine. The streets were empty, though. There were dumpsters everywhere. It was, people weren't even out. There was no business. You could see the fact that the buildings were, whatever percentage it was, abandoned. Like, not to defend Bill de Blasio at all. Not all of that was his fault. Like, that was ground zero for COVID at the beginning, and then just got totally mishandled by the government, obviously. But like, a lot of it was, and he was a stone cold moron. I mean, the guy had a below room temperature IQ. So when Adams came in, I remember going up there a year after that and being like, whoa, okay, it's a little better. We went out to the club. I was like, went to some of the old spots I would always go to. I'm like, okay. Some of these businesses, unfortunately, can never come back. Like, we're going to have to figure that out. But things a little cleaner. You weren't seeing rats everywhere. Then I came up a year after that. This is like November 2022. And I spent 4 or 5 days there. Walked all over the city, all over the boroughs. And I was like, wow. And I say all this because Eric Adams was your prototypical kind of sleazy politician or whatever. I'm not denying that. I don't like politicians at all. They're not welcome on my show. But he was an old school cop in New York. You know what I mean? Like an old school blue collar Democrat. And that's why he worked as mayor, and that's why he was able to rebuild the place. New York is not the kind of place that can be run by a Republican. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. It is damn well not the kind of place that can be run by a socialist. That is far worse, in my opinion. It needs to be run by some sort of like sleazy, no bullshit, old school blue collar Democrat. And the really sad thing about Adams is I knew when they were sending all the immigrant buses up there with literally like gang members, from Florida to Texas, which, hey, I'm not blaming those guys for doing that. It's easy for people in, coastal areas like me to sit there and say, you guys figure out immigration, but, leave the borders open or whatever, and not have to deal with the consequences. And so for them, for the governors of those states to be like, okay, well, reap what you sow, totally get it. And it sucks, but I understand why they did that. Adams did too. Adams is a cop. He knew that was bad news. And I always said to people, back as far as 2022, when I realized like he was really cleaning that place up, I said, don't listen to what the guy says. Just watch what he does. Because he would say whatever the soup du jour cringiest thing you could possibly say was. I remember he was like talking with the mayor of Philadelphia before an Eagles-Giants game, and he's like, the winner has to have vegan chicken sent to him or so, like something just very gay. And I was like, but that's not real. Like he'll just kind of say those things. With the immigration thing, he spent maybe a year, 2 years, saying the right thing. Oh, we're welcoming them with open arms. We're a sanctuary city or whatever. And I'm like, he doesn't think that. And then the minute he opened his mouth and said, this is a problem. The border's a problem. This can't keep happening. We need to stop this. We got Trent Aragua at the Roosevelt Hotel. No good. What was it? 2 weeks later, he was charged?
Yeah.
And it just makes you lose faith because that is what initially opened the door for Mamdani. If Adams never gets charged, there's no Mamdani. He's going to get his next term. He's going to keep whatever he's got going on. But they publicly killed him, and then he did have to, get friendly with Trump as well to get out of that, which I understand that. That's fine. But that didn't help him in New York. And so with Mamdani, who is a sleazebag politician, I want to be so clear, but have you seen his accents?
That's terrible. I mean, he's as bad as Hillary Clinton on the fucking campaign trail.
I think that's way too generous. I mean, he's got foreign accents.
Yeah.
It's like, it's bad. But ignoring all the things that are obviously like a joke about him, and I'm not one of these guys that likes to pull up tweets from 2018 and hold you to them, right? But when you have, 6,000 of them over a 7-year period, I think you can form some patterns there. That said, he ran a brilliant campaign because he went out to people and met them where they were, even if he was totally faking it, and I think he was. But he made it look good. He went to these districts that had flipped for Trump, like in New York. I mean, that's how crazy things had gotten. There are districts within New York City, neighborhoods that voted for Donald Trump predominantly. And instead of going to them saying, how could you? He went to them and said, hey, you voted for Trump. Yeah. Obviously, I disagree with him on politics. I'd love to know why. And they all went like this. They all said, it seemed like I had a little more money in my pocket when Donald Trump was here. These are normal Americans who want to have their job. They want to pay their bills. They don't want to be up to their fucking eyeballs in debt. And he went and met them where they were. And even though his solutions, I think, provably don't work because he's a hardcore socialist. I mean, that is what he is. The way he was able to sell that to them made people, and it's not to say they're stupid, they're just in their world, right? Maybe they know less about this stuff than I do, where part of my job is to kind of know what's going on in the world. They heard it and they said, ooh, maybe that could mean more money for me. Okay, if that's going to help my family, cool, you got my vote. The final thing about Mamdani, though, that should not get overlooked here, that is just crazy to me that this is even involved in an election in America for mayor, was the whole Israel thing, though. He's a long-time, hardcore anti-Israel guy, has very strong views on that. That is a much more popular sentiment now because of what the current Israeli government, certain actions they've taken in Gaza, which you can't defend it. It's just at that point where you cannot defend that. That said, there was a clip, 2 weeks before that primary election that went very viral online where it was, some debate between all the Democratic primary runners. There's probably 10 of them on stage. And the question was, the guy running the debate goes, as mayor of New York City, where would your first international diplomatic visit be to? Now, I don't know about everyone else out there, but this was news to me that the mayor of a city going on an international trip was a diplomatic mission. Didn't know that was a thing. That's not what I would be electing in New York.
I think that's pretty textbook liberal, though. I don't think you don't typically see a lot of conservative mayors or even governors, for that matter, doing shit like that. Not to say that it's never happened.
Yeah.
But L.A., New York, Governor, Newsom. I mean, you name it. It's like they're all running for fucking president.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And recently I saw people were giving Sarah, what's her name, Huckabee, some shit because her dad is the ambassador to Israel, so she went over and visited, and she's a governor right now. But why is anyone if you're in the Senate and if you're in the House, all right, that makes sense. If you're running state government or a city or a town, like that shouldn't be in the question in a 2-hour debate where you got 10 people on stage vying for minutes. So they asked this question, and everyone around the table was just trying to say how much Israel would be their first visit. And Mamdani, instead of coming out and saying like his opinion on Israel, took that moment to be like, you know, I'm running for mayor of New York, so I'm going to meet New Yorkers, including Jewish New Yorkers, right where they are in their neighborhood and look to improve here. And everyone on the stage started yelling at him, going, he won't say it. And then they start asking follow-up questions saying, do you recognize Israel as the Jewish state? And I'm just sitting there and I'm going, oh my God, because it went crazy viral. And you're asking about what is at the moment an unpopular country that has some work to do to be popular again at some point, if they can even do that. And most importantly, you are now feeding into all the thoughts everyone has about is there so many things about Israel that's involved in our domestic politics? It's involved in the fucking mayor of New York. That's crazy. And so Mamdani, I don't think it is any coincidence that the 20 to 35-year-old voting bloc, from different backgrounds, by the way, it wasn't all like just one type of person, came out and voted for him in droves on an issue that had nothing to do with the city or the politics running it. That is the fault of our system, not looking itself in the mirror and saying like, whoa, what are we doing here? So there's a lot going on with him, but I'm very upset about it because he's a very extreme guy, and I just watched New York kind of come back in a lot of ways. And if, you know, hopefully he's lying about some of the stances he has just from like a day-to-day running the business of the city. Because if he's not, you know, it's going to go through a tough period for a few years again.
A couple of things. You mentioned that a Republican can't run New York. I think Giuliani did a bordering on masterful job of pulling that city out of the depths of where it was at and putting it back into one of the best cities in the world. I don't know that at this point you could repeat that, but at that time, I mean, he was tough on crime and very, very conservative in most ways, and I think again in the scope of the window of time that he was a mayor, I know there's been some things post time as mayor that have blackened his eyes a little bit, but it seems like he was pretty popular and did a pretty damn good job at running the city. The other part or question I guess I wanted to follow up with is, I have my theory, but I'm curious to get yours. It sounds like you kind of already gave it, but why is a guy like Mamdani then so able to say a few things and get so many people to vote for him?
Well, the other part, which I didn't say, is that none of the other candidates met people where they were. I mean, the other main candidate who's running against him was Andrew Cuomo, who, you know, it was like pulling teeth getting him to get in a private security-backed black car just to come down and like give 5 words to ABC 5 or 4 or whatever channel it is. You know, so he was running against an out-of-touch base, and obviously Adams had been totally decimated in the spotlight. Now they're trying to put money behind him to try to resurrect him and have him win, and I don't know if he will. On your point with Giuliani, in the years after September 11th, he was America's mayor. And there was so much good there. And I wish, like, just for his own sake and for ours, that, like, he had just walked off the stage after that and gone about life rather than do some of the things that I've heard he does behind the scenes now. But, you know, also to your point, it was a different time. Yeah. Because when you talk to, I have an interesting perspective on this just with people I know, but when you talk to people who were from tougher neighborhoods during that time, these are not people who want crime to run rampant, except for the criminals, right? That's not the case. But they do care about how it's handled, right? And rather than pick on Giuliani, I should actually really mention Michael Bloomberg, who I believe was an independent when he was in office. So he's not Democrat, he's not Republican. But like the whole stop and frisk thing, and stuff like that, yeah, that helps crime statistics a lot in the short term. The data is, I think, pretty good on that. Maybe someone will call me out in the comments, but I think it's pretty good. It leaves a mark in the long term, though. It leaves a mark in the trust department, in the us versus them department, in the generational department. You're putting fathers in jail sometimes for things that shouldn't be in jail for. You know, leaving the kids at home with a single mom who's trying to support them and is never around. You create self-fulfilling prophecies. So there's a middle ground. It's like when I say something like New York needs like a blue-collar Democrat to run it, it's not a political statement. I don't mean it that way. I live in Hoboken. I don't vote in New York elections. When I do vote in elections that I'm allowed to vote in, I vote journalist abstain. Like, I stay out of this shit. But just looking at it over time, that's kind of like the root average of what you would just kind of get if you just put New York in a melting pot and had it all together. Is kind of like that old, less corrupt than Tammany Hall, at least giving the appearance of trying to take care of people and keep the streets somewhat safe. Like, I'm into the end results with things. I recognize that the people who want these kinds of jobs, who are involved in these kinds of things with politics, usually aren't the best people. Almost always they aren't. But again, I think some common sense with Mom Donnie would help a lot. I get people's anger. I get people's, what's the word? Malaise with the system and all the headlines with Adams. I get it. I really do. But, it's like anything else in life. The answer to the solution to your problem is supposed to be at equilibrium, not in the equal but opposite reaction. It's bad for a way different litany of reasons. It's just physics. I mean, that's what I come back to. I'm like, don't look at me. It's just physics,
I've been dying to ask you. I mean, we talked a little bit about it when I was on your show, but since you're in the hot seat, what were you thinking in terms of starting a podcast, going from what you were doing, your upbringing, like not being in the military or law enforcement? Not that that's a knock, and I want to kind of preempt the question with, and this isn't me blowing smoke. I mean, this is a big part of why you're sitting here. Is I genuinely believe and think that you ask some of the best questions, and some of the interviews I've seen you do with guys who've been on this show and a lot of other popular, veteran podcasts are as good as any and better than a lot. I really think, like, the way that your mind works, the fact that you don't have that background, I think is both very important and beneficial to the way that you think through follow-up questions and even initial ones that you ask. And I'm frankly blown away by how good of a job you do at interviewing guys from the same background in such an entertaining and thorough manner.
Wow.
But I'm still curious what the fuck you were thinking of like, I'm going all in on this podcast thing. Like, what went through your mind to decide that that's what you wanted to do?
Well, thank you for that. That means a lot coming from you, especially not just as someone who served at the tip of the spear, but you're a guy who's been in that seat doing that as well for many, many years. We're one of the first to do it, so that's really, really, really cool to hear, humbling to hear. As far as starting this thing, man, a lot of people don't believe me when I say this, but I did start on Wall Street coming out of college. It was one of those things where I think my whole life, and this was no one's fault but my own. I want to be very clear about that. But, as an only child, you have to figure out a lot about the world. And there's some things that you get really ahead of everyone on because you have more time to kind of solve things for yourself. And then there's some things you're way behind on. And then some things you kind of get caught up in whatever society is doing at the time. And so I never thought about this, believe it or not, but there was always that voice of like, well, this is what society says. You go to school, you work hard, you get to high school, you get good grades, you take the SAT, do as best as you can, try to get into a good college, make sure you get your extracurriculars and everything, play a few sports so it looks important on a resume. You're also a white male from New Jersey, so you're operating behind the 8 ball here going into that. Hopefully you get into a solid school at the very least, something your parents can throw a graduation party and tell people, hey, look, my kid's not a fucking retard. And then you go on from there. You drink, smoke, and fuck for 4 years, get your work in, get a pretty good GPA so that you can take that opportunity as a, summer after sophomore year, summer after junior year, do your internships, try to figure out some respectable industry that you can land in. And then when you get out of college, find that respectable industry, whatever it is. You don't know anything about the world. You don't know how things work. No matter what people are saying about colleges right now, right and a lot right about some of the scams and horrible things that have happened within college. One thing that I won't blame college for is it's not meant to teach you the actual real world. You have to go out and experience that. It can teach you the language to try to understand some things, but you have to go kind of put yourself into it. So, the societal plan was, all right, go find that respectable industry, put yourself in there. Work like a dog for 2-3 years after college. Try to rise up the ranks and get yourself in position. At some point there, find the girl. Get engaged within a couple years. Settle down, have some kids. Maybe by this point you're VP. 32, you start popping out kids. Now you're starting to rise up the ranks. You get, a $250,000 a year salary. Someone's saying that you're going to be in the 40 under 40, whatever it might be. And you keep going. You build up your 401k. Your kids get a little older. You start thinking about college because now it's probably triple the scam at that point.
If you're looking to get stronger, move better, and actually build real-world capability, not influencer nonsense, I launched a new Navy SEAL-style fitness app that gives you workouts built on the training foundation I used in the teams and as a BUD/S instructor. Functional strength, conditioning, mobility, and a simple, repeatable program that fits into your normal life. Check it out. Link is in the description, and let's get to work.
So, on Saturday mornings, you play golf with the boys to try to feel important, and eventually you raise your way up to, president or whatever it could be of whatever bumfuck company it is. And then, you get through your 50s and you start looking at that clock running out saying, do I have enough money to make sure that when I retire, I can look up at the sun and wait to die and not hope it's tomorrow? You get to that point, 65, you check out the 401k, you go down to Florida, you get a condo, you look at the sun, you wait to die. And that's a cynical way of looking at it, but it's this... You just do the next thing. Whatever's in front of you, you check the box. Kind of like you were talking about earlier with people. They're just kind of on letting the background music play and they're following it where it wants to take them. And I got out of college. I got a really good job on Wall Street with a great team in something called the private bank at Merrill Lynch Bank of America, which means in English, because, when people say Wall Street, that can mean fucking 40 million different things. Our business was we worked with ultra high net worth individuals and a lot of public companies or very large private companies. And with ultra high net worth individuals, we were their quarterback. Everything from their investments to their planning to, estates to you name it, that's what we did. My boss was an extremely successful guy, had been in the business for 30 years. Guy was like a second dad to me, the man. And we'd do that, and then with public companies, we could do something really simple, like a 401k plan, which is a participation trophy. Or you could do a 10b5-1 plan, help with options trading, which is, you have to legally register that with the SEC, publicly disclose it. You want to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted for stuff like that. But the banking part of it and working in a bank, this wasn't Wolf of Wall Street 97 or something like those days were gone. This was the kind of place where you had to ask permission for toilet paper when you took a shit. And so obviously that was not a fit for me. But I took this time to learn how the real world works because there was half of my job that I loved, and it applies directly to what I do now. I'm going to bring it back to the podcast. But half of my job was to go into the biggest city in the world and know people. Who worked with who, why this girl talked with that guy, why this industry was working on this thing for that industry that's brand new, by the way, why so much money's piling in over here versus over there. And then also you're naturally, if you actually care about people, you're getting into interpersonal relationships with people of all ages, backgrounds, and positions. And so I loved that part of the job. And in doing that part of the job, I finally stepped out of myself during those 5 years. And it was probably about a year and a half in where I was like, oh, wait a minute. This doesn't mean I'm wearing a suit every day. In a bank, crunching numbers. I'm a creative. I've been a writer since I could think. You know, like everything, I went through everything I'd done in my life that was of my own interest or that I was good at. It was all creative work. So I started doing side LLC work with a couple of my buddies where we would do marketing for people and stuff like that. And I stayed working hard on Wall Street. And the way that part of the business worked on Wall Street was you come out of college, you grind like a dog for 4 or 5 years, you make no money, you can pay your bills, but, you know, if you do a good job, you kind of get the offer and you get brought into the inner sanctum. So I got the offer from my boss in late summer 2019. It was a unbelievable offer, and not in hindsight. I mean, like at the time I was like, holy shit. But I immediately knew I couldn't take that because hypothetically I could have taken it and collected for a couple years, you know, built a nice bank account and then pieced, but I would never, ever do, like I'm a huge, loyalty is my number one thing. And like he was literally, without going into details, inviting me into the innermost sanctums of everything he had ever built. And so I was like, I can't do this. I need to go do something else. And so I think he was sad about that, but I think he also saw it coming because he could see me finding a lot of different interests, and also he knew the business wasn't what it was when he was coming up. So he was cool as shit, and this is late summer 2019, so we're 6 months before the pandemic, something like that. And he says to me, hey, the company like Merrill is paying you. You're doing great work. You don't need to leave tomorrow. Just keep doing great work. I imagine you're trying to change industries. And I was like, yes. And he goes, okay, that's not going to happen overnight. I'm sure you already know that. So while you're figuring that out, I'm going to help you however I can with whatever connections I may have and stuff you want to work with, but you can also like pay your bills and stay here and keep doing this job, which was like...
That seems like an excruciatingly rare experience
Yes.
in that industry.
I don't want to speak for the whole place, but I was very lucky. Like Larry to this day is my guy. And that, I'll tell you why that ended up being like one of the main reasons I'm sitting here today, because I knew I would get my ass kicked on the job trail, because if you're a recruiter, if you're an HR, you're looking through 1 million resumes every day. You don't want to have to problem solve when you look at a resume. So when you see a 22-year-old coming out of a basic college with a marketing degree looking to be a social media manager, check, 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 cool, hire him. When you see someone that has like a resume as a banker and did some side LLCs and, you know, went to college, seems to have done pretty well, but now he's 25, 26, and you have to start trying to solve where this person fits. And so a lot of them would just be like, it looks great, but I don't know where you fit. So I'm telling you, Mike, I was applying to jobs that paid $38,000 a year in New York City. I had no illusion or delusions of grandeur. I was like, I don't care. I'll start at ramen noodles and prove myself. I know some of the work we did on these LLCs. I can do this. And I was getting my ass kicked over and over. And then I started to have like, you know, these little breakthroughs in February 2020, where it felt like, ooh, an opportunity might land here. But before that, right in January, it was like the low of the low, because I'm like, damn, I can't get a door open. I was banging down I had an amazing network. I was banging down every lane of my network I could, trying to find something, and I couldn't. And so people had always come up to me and said things like, you should have a podcast and stuff like that. And I would always laugh and be like, fuck am I going to do with me? Fuck you. What am I going to do with a podcast? Who wants to listen to me? And so I would do these different media work events starting in 2019 with my LLCs. One of them was we went to the Maxwell Awards, which is like a historic football award system, in March 2019 and did a bunch of interviews on camera. And it ended up being that I was one of the people doing those like on the fly. Long story, but it wasn't supposed to be that way. Like my buddy Chaz was going to be doing all of them. And then it was a 3-day event. So Friday morning they were having the press conference, and Chaz, his client was Ray Lewis, the linebacker who was getting the Lifetime Achievement Award. So he comes downstairs with Ray, and we have the whole studio set up at the back of the press conference. We're going to start getting all these people, Coach of the Year, all these different people to come through, and Chaz is going to interview them. And he comes up to me and he goes, he's one of my best friends, but he always has like a way of friendly delivering crazy news where you're like, wait a minute, what'd you just say? He's like, oh, no, it'll work out. But he comes up, he goes, hey, Jules, change of plans. So Ray wants to do a full panel up in his suite, and I'm going to run that, and I got a couple of the camera guys to do that. So you're going to do these ones now down here. Like, as we're walking into this press conference, I was like, what? He's like, no, it'll be fine. You got it. And my boy Mitch was running all the production and also doing the individual sit-downs. He's done this like all his life. And so he's like, Mitch, you got him? And Mitch's like, yeah. And I'm like, what the fuck? So, you know, I'm just like, I guess I'm just doing these live. And the first guy was Vince Papale, who was the subject of Mark Wahlberg's 2006 movie, Invincible. I'm an Eagles fan, so I like Vince. But we sat down, and I don't really know. I blacked out for like 25 minutes, and we just had this great back and forth. And at the end of it, he comes up to me on the side, and he goes, I handed him my Merrill business card. That's what I did. I handed him my Merrill Lynch business card. And he looks at it, he's like, you work at Merrill Lynch? I'm like, yeah, this is like my side gig. And he's like, you should do this. You're good at this. I was like, oh, wow. And so I did a couple more of them after that. And then we did another event in June. And so people would come up to me and say, like, I should do this. And a lot of people would come up and say, you need to have a podcast. So January 2020, I'm at the lowest of the low. My buddy Ty ran a lacrosse company where he would train like high-level high school and middle school lacrosse players. And so he had rented out this huge warehouse for a day to do like a mega camp for, like 200 kids. And he said, we have a studio set up with all the lighting and everything. And he's like, at the end of it, I'd really like you to interview me for the company. And Ty had a great story with lacrosse. He had played nationally, internationally for Team Hungary because he has family from there and everything. But he was like, when you interview me, he's one of my really good friends. He's like, ask me about all of it, meaning like including some of the mistakes he had made in college that were really dumb. I was like, you wanna get that on content? He's like, yeah, like I'm training people's kids. I want them to know, like, don't fall into some of the traps I did or whatever, which I thought was really cool. So we went and did that, put the lights on at like 10 o'clock at night after this camp on a Sunday night. And he and I went back and forth for like 35 minutes. And at the end of it, all the other lights come on like in the place. And there were still 35 people there. And they were all like clapping. And then they were all coming up to me like, do you have a podcast, bro? You need a podcast. I was like, what the fuck? So this was January 26th, 2020, which was the day Kobe Bryant died. So it was a very weird day. And I had to drive home to this was in South Jersey. I had to drive home late at night to North Jersey. And I'm in the car driving in silence, just like thinking about my life, where I'm at. I can't get through on the job trail, whatever. And this thing keeps playing back to me. All these people coming up to me saying I need to do a podcast. And so with no plan whatsoever, zero. I mean, this was very stupid. Everything about this was stupid. I need to highlight that. There was no like genius grand plan here. But I was like, well, if I did a podcast, I'd do it right. I'd have the right equipment. I'd do it in person, have the studio. So I started making it my Saturday afternoon hobby to go to B&H Photo and learn everything I need to know about podcasting equipment, and then go home and research all of it and watch YouTube videos about it. And on maybe March 4th, 2020, I hit enter and ordered all this equipment with money I didn't have. And if you remember, like literally that day or like the day after, that's when the COVID shit really hit the fan, because I'm still working on Wall Street. I got clients calling like it's the world ending. And so I forget that I did this. And then Friday, March 13th, first day of quarantine.
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Hold that thought. I get the notification. Your equipment has arrived downstairs at my apartment. And I'm like, oh my God. All my job prospects just dried. All the good stuff that was happening in February just dried up. Gone. Right then and there. Gone that day. So I'm back to square zero, and I'm like, I just spent thousands of dollars that I don't have. The world is ending, and now it's here. So I bring it up to my apartment. I sit it on the couch. I step back from the couch. I look at the couch, and I don't know how long it was, but I'm just looking at this going, Julian, you have done a lot of stupid shit in your life. This is the stupidest shit you have ever done. And then maybe it was 30 seconds, maybe it was 60 seconds, but I just looked at it and I was like, well, if not now, when? So like you said, it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve at that time. So I got 2 very important phone calls in the next 4 or 5 days. One was from my boss, Larry, who we had, it was actually really cool. We had, of all my time working with him and working with the clients, this was probably our most successful time. We had everyone set up so well for this event. So we got like 3-4 days into it. And it wasn't like we were like, we're good. But we were like, whoa, we're in business here. We're going to have an opportunity as well. Like, it wasn't the 5-alarm fire that it was in the 2 weeks leading up to it. So he called me and he said, listen, I don't know when we're going back to the office. It'll probably be April, May. I was going to be leaving, by the way, March 31st, no matter what. I talked to him about that in February. So he's like, I imagine all your job prospects just dried up. I said, yes. He goes, all right, why don't you stay on till we go back to the office? You can pay your bills, whatever. I'm like, that works for me. Great. Meanwhile, I'm already started around the clock, like building this podcast, like literally sitting in quarantine doing that. So I'm like, okay, all right, cool. That buys me a couple months. And he's like, if we have some stuff come up, I'll send it to you. You get it done. I could do that stuff in my sleep. So I'm like, cool. Then my dad calls. I don't remember who called first, but my dad also called like same day or day after. And he goes, do not re-sign your lease. I was like, why not? And he's like, this is going to be at least a year. I was like, it's 2 weeks to flatten the curve. What are you talking about? He's like, they love this. This is going to be a year. They love this. He's like, these politicians love this. There's no lid on this thing. Come down here to South Jersey. Like, do not re-sign your lease. We'll get it figured out. Okay. So I leave on March 31st, and I get to my parents' house, and my dad sees the podcast equipment. He's like, what the fuck is that? And I was like, think about doing a podcast. He doesn't even know what a podcast is. And he was just like, there's the back room. If not now, when? And that was that. So I spent 6 months working around the clock, 7 days a week, building my studio. I couldn't, I'd have to take you like through the Google Docs I made and everything, like just building out how to do this so that it could just be me, whatever that was. And then I went public with it. I literally didn't tell anyone in my life about it, except a few close friends I had come by the house, but most of my close friends I didn't. None of my family I did. And I launched it on September 15th, 2020 publicly with 10 episodes, and I was just like, the boats were burned. I left Merrill the day before because we never went back to the office, so Larry let me stay on, and that ended up being, I didn't have a very good salary, but that was literally the runway money in hindsight that I needed to be able to not make money for the next 2 years and just grind like a dog and try to get to the point to where people would be watching it. And looking back on it, I probably, when I started to really take off, December 2021, and started to actually get money coming in, I probably had about 4 months left of runway at that point. So me being able to stay until September and do little things for him here and there saved me. And then like I said, my parents letting me have the studio in their house. It's gangsters as hell.
That's fucking wild, man. I mean, that's a lot of balls in the air, but also the amount of uncertainty with that, and just it does sound a little bit like the uncertainty of all of the shutdown stuff related to COVID kind of was a springboard. It almost kind of forced your hand a little bit, with that. I mean, not forced you to do it, but the shit or get off the pot moment of if not now, when. It's like, yeah, like right now is such a unique time in our nation's history and for decades to come. It's like, what else are you going to do? Was there, I guess, periods throughout that first couple of years where you ever seriously considered quitting and going back to Wall Street?
No.
Never?
I was never going back to Wall Street. I
Or I guess-
didn't even do my, like, you get the Series 7 and 66 and all that, and then you have to do the continuing education, which is like 2 seconds just to be able to hit a few buttons and press enter, pretend you actually read it. I didn't even do that.
Did you ever consider quitting and doing something else? Like, no regrets?
There was a lot going on, but I did have one plan. I should have said this. When I was in those 6 months building it up, at the beginning of that time, in April, May, my plan was to move out in December to Philly and get a bartending job. And I was taking my 3-year window to make money to 5, because I knew that there would have to be, time spent on bartending and doing that. And I said, fine, I'll bet on myself. All good. Because I didn't like where my life was. I was like, I felt like a loser. I felt like I hadn't figured things out, and I felt like I had to go take it. And so I said, I'm all in on this. I'm going to do this. And that's that. But I started getting sick in December, January 2019, 2020. And until May 21, we didn't know what it was. So I literally thought I was dying. Spoiler alert, I wasn't dying, I was fine. But I would get these attacks. Like I worked out, I trained with guys who were literally like pro boxers. To be clear, I was not, but I worked out like a pro athlete after college for 5 years. And I was in tip-top shape. And even through 2 shoulder reconstruction surgeries, like tip-top shape. And so December, January 2019, 2020, I started having these strange attacks where I couldn't breathe. When I would get into the gym, things would feel tight. My workouts would be 80% what they could be, and then it would fall even more. And so I went to a pulmonologist February 18th, 2020, and I went into his office and I said, Doc, I want to apologize if I'm crazy. Okay, if I'm wasting your time, I'm so sorry. I'm a little bit about this stuff, like careful with my health, almost like a hypochondriac, so this is more precautionary than anything. He's like, no, you having a problem? Let me know. So we sit there and we talk, and he just kind of interviews me to go through everything about my life and what I'm doing. And he said, I'm really glad you came in, because this is strange. You said you've been training like this for 5 years, and now you're having these issues. You're having random attacks when you're not in the gym. He's like, have you ever taken a breathing test? I said, no. And he goes, all right. It's a little expensive. I said, I don't care. Health is like one thing. Even when I had no money, I was like, cash or check. Like, I don't fuck around with that. So it's like, okay, I'm going to send you downstairs to do that then. So when they give you a breathing test, they do 2 types. They do it where they have you like breathe into a tube, and they just tell they coach you to breathe, stop, and they do it like in different tranches. And I know you, with some of your long background, you're very familiar with all this stuff. But for people out there who aren't, the next round they'll do albuterol, and they'll have you do the same things, and they just want to measure your lung capacity round to round. So I go do this. I go back upstairs after an hour or whatever, and 10 minutes later the doctor walks in with the clipboard, like with the furrowed brow, like this, and I'm like, that's not good. And he goes, hey. I'm like, hey. It's like, how you feeling? I'm like, I don't know, like I'm fucking dying. That's why I'm here. He goes, do you care if I grab my partner just to go through some of these results before I go through them with you? I said, by all means. He leaves the room. I'm like, I must have lung cancer. Like, this is not good. So he comes back in the room. He's like, okay, all right. Here's how this test works. And he runs through. He goes, when we're comparing non-albuterol to albuterol, good lungs are supposed to be 97 to 100%. Lungs that are fine are 94 to 97. Lungs that have mild beginning asthma, 91 to 94. Lungs that definitely have asthma, but manageable, 88 to 91. Lungs that have asthma that needs to be treated pretty well, 85 to 88. Lungs below 85 got a real fucking problem. You scored an 83. I'm glad you came. And I was like, wow. And he goes, all right, I'm not diagnosing you with asthma today. That's too soon. Like, this is something recent. This could be other things. It was very smart. He was like being conservative about it. He goes, I want to test you on an inhaler for the next 3 weeks. And then let's see where you're at. So we do that. And immediately my workouts went up to about 90% capacity. It wasn't perfect, but I get these little attacks, but I could do it. And so I go in to meet with him March 10th, like 3 days before COVID. And he's like, all right, how would you feel about meeting with a bunch of different specialists to rule out other stuff? I said, that's fine. Let's do it. So literally March 13th, the first day of quarantine, that morning I was doing a stress test with a cardiologist. He's like, your heart's great. And then I went home to my parents and my symptoms started getting worse. So June 13th, 2020, I had been working all day and I went downstairs into the basement to do a little workout. And I started warmed up with basic, dumbbell rows, bent over. And suddenly, and my left arm started shaking. I go, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. Like, I'm 26 or 27. Like, this is not supposed to happen. And I went outside. I was like pacing around, like trying to stop it. And my aunt was home. My parents weren't home. And I'm like the last guy who's like, let's go to the emergency room. But I was like, hey, Mary, we got to go to the emergency room. So she takes me there. I'm still having attacks. They give me the emergency room. I'm still having attacks. It calms down. They do an EKG. EKG is fine. They're like, this is really weird. So I see specialists for the next 11 months after that. Nobody can figure it out. Meanwhile, I'm building the podcast. My body's falling off a cliff. I would wake up at about 10 a.m. every day, face totally puffed up. Like,
parents have a cat you're allergic to or some weird shit?
Face puffed up and everything. And it was miserable. So the first hour or two of the day, I would just like walk around to like get my mind right. And then by 11:30 or noon, I would be down at the computer and I would be at that computer until 4 or 4:30 in the morning. And that's what I did for the next 4 years of my life. So I was building it. It was getting better, but like I was constantly on fumes. I couldn't work out anymore. By the beginning of 2021, there was literally no such thing as working out. I had already lost at that point probably 30 pounds, something like that. And I remember thinking to myself when I was at a low place, March 2021, I was about 30 or 41 episodes in on March 31st. And I was like, maybe I'm dying. Like, no one can figure this out. Maybe, like, this is just it. I had 25 listeners at the time, hadn't gone viral with anything yet. And I knew I had talent at this thing. I'm my worst critic, but, like, this was the first time in my life I didn't tell myself I sucked at something. Had a lot of room for improvement, but I knew I could do it. And I was just like, it's almost like my body's just telling me no. So the plan about being a bartender was out. And I had to stay at my parents' house because, like, the idea of, like, even having to be on a schedule to do anything physical was not, this was, like, not in the cards. So, very long story short, I go to meet with a doctor who's taken all the other opinions from the fucking, 13 other doctors I had been to at that point. And he's like, they're all right. Every single thing I'm reading matches up with what you are, but we don't have a diagnosis. And so he said, I want you to tell me the story of the last 2 years of your life. I got my mom in the meeting. I'm like, what is this, like a fucking psychiatry? I'm paying by the hour here. Like, Jesus Christ. All right, whatever. So I tell him the story. And I tell him I grew up with a golden retriever from age 4 to 18. Slept in my bed, all that, yada, yada. And then she died. And November, at some point, I'm like, yeah, so November 2019, my mom and dad got a golden retriever. I was still living in North Jersey. Like, I was coming down a lot of weekends. And he, like, looks up like Kaiser Soze. He's like, keep going. And then we start going through when I moved back home and things I would do. And he goes, oh, my God, you're allergic to the dog. It's like, Doc, I'm not allergic to dogs. I don't think you heard me. I grew up with a golden retriever. He's like, no. He's like, you're not just allergic to dogs. You're allergic to, like, everything. But your body always was able to fight it off. He said, at one point, I had told him that I was always a little stuffed up growing up. but I just thought that was normal. He's like, that's not normal, number one. He said, I think what happened is the dog left your life when you were 18. Golden Retrievers are like the most allergenic type dog there is. And so your body was like, all right, great, it's gone, never again. And so now it got reintroduced and it broke down every barrier for all your allergies. So he said, you're going to go see my partner she's an allergist, and she's going to test you next week. And so they go and they test me. And they do this like skin prick test on your back and your arms. And when they're going through the sizes of what they're putting on you, because they're basically measuring what the skin will react to, and then they measure the sizes. Big size, big problem. They'd go through and they'd be like, something normal, 1 by 1 1/4, and then they get to dust and it'd be like 400 by 1.5. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. And they were doing this over and over again, and they're like, damn, you're really fucked up.
February has a way of testing discipline. January starts strong, better routines, earlier nights, and then life creeps back in. Late nights return, schedules get chaotic, and sleep is usually the first thing sacrificed. And here's the truth. Taking care of yourself isn't about perfection. It's about having habits that you can return to. That's why Dream by Beam has become a non-negotiable for me. Beam sent me Dream for free. In my honest opinion, once I started using it, everything changed. I sleep through the night, I shut my mind off, and I wake up energized, not groggy. Dream is made with reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin, designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling solid. No next day fog, and it tastes great. I've been drinking the chocolate peanut butter flavor that they sent me, and it's like hot cocoa before bed. Until I started using Dream, I didn't realize how much bad sleep was holding me back. Now I'm sharper at work, more present with the family, and more consistent in the gym. And I'm not alone. Beam has improved over 28 million nights of sleep. So if you've been waiting for the right time to try Dream, this is it. They're offering my listeners an exclusive discount going into the new year. Go to shopbeam.com/micdrop and use the code MicDrop to get my exclusive offer for up to 40% off Beam's Dream Powder. So with my discount code MicDrop, it's all caps, all one word, you can get their best-selling Dream Powder for just $39. Seriously, think about it. How much would you pay for a truly great night of sleep? With my discount, it's about $1.25 per night. So go to shopbeam.com/MicDrop today.
So they said to me, congratulations, you're not dying. You're going to be fine. But your whole immune system shut down at all times. You can't breathe. Your gastric system's having problems because they're like, it's a cascading effect on your body because of how allergic you are to shit. And it's like, Aleve is only going to do so much. Like, you're really fucked up. So they said the only treatment you can really do is allergy shots, which usually work. And it's a customized shot that they put together. And they're like, you have to do it every week and never miss a week for at least a year. And then you have to continue after that every 2 to 4 weeks. And at the time, I didn't own a car. I was living in my parents' house. I knew right then and there, I'm like, I'm going to miss a week with this job. That's not possible. So I said, I'm not dying. And they're like, no, you're not dying. You're fine. I'm like, okay. So if I could live with this for a little while longer while I'm building enough to be able to get up to like New York or Hoboken and live very close to a doctor's office, I could do that. And they're like, yeah, you could. So that's what I did. And then it was literally like when I moved up to Hoboken, August 1st, 2023, I was on my last fumes. I was on my last, like, it was like the last breath at that point. I remember getting to Hoboken and I would have these full-blown asthma attacks. I had hair falling out all over my body. Like, it was gross. I couldn't go on the PATH train because I would literally have an attack down there. And I was like, I can't live like this. And so I had already started to begin the process of getting the allergy shots made. And I was like, I just got to last because the allergy shots will start in November. And then, you know, they told me, they said it takes about 3 months before you see the first effects. So I said, all right, let's just get through these 6 months. And I did, and it turned out to be the roughest time I ever had on YouTube. It was like a perfect storm. But in hindsight, I'm very glad it all happened because I learned a lot during that period. I had to push myself really past the limit. And then I remember Christmas 2023. I was about a month into the shots, so they weren't having an effect yet. But I went down to South Jersey on the 24th, spent Christmas with my parents. My grandfather lived an hour away at the Jersey Shore, so 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock on Christmas Day, we went over there with the whole family, had a nice 7 hours, and then at 8 o'clock, I drove an hour home to Mullica Hill. I took a separate car there, took my dad's car there, because this is what I did. And I got back home by 9, I was in front of the computer by 9:15, I edited episode 178 with Matt Cox until 3:45 in the morning. And I remember looking at that clock, my body was shot, couldn't breathe, and it was done, and I was like, how much longer am I going to do this? This is no way to live. We're not doing this anymore. I'm not waking up at 10 a.m. and going to bed at fucking 4:30 in the morning. This is terrible for my health. I had always been so conscious of being in good shape and all that, and I was a skeleton. And so I said, all right, I'm going back up north on the 27th. On the 28th, I'm going to be in the gym by 7 a.m. And it's going to suck for the first couple months because I'm not better at all. But I'm like, I need to get myself in the habit again and just work till I can't. And that's what I did. And now, 2 years later, the podcast is a lot farther along. I've been healthy for a while now. The shots worked. And I've been in the gym 6 days a week. Did it this morning while I was in town here. Like, it's a part of my schedule again and part of what I do. And, I'm a huge believer that, like, health is wealth. And I don't even think you have to be a believer. I think that really is what it is. And so, I don't know. There were a lot of different things that got thrown at me during this period that I think if I look at the list of struggles people go through to build things, I'm one of the lucky ones. Because people go through a lot worse than what I did. But, the worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I remember what it felt like at those lower moments, even when publicly the show was growing and seemingly doing well. And I never want to feel that way again. So hopefully I've kind of paid those dues at least. But, I mean, you're a long-time business owner and successful builder of a lot of things. You know how it is. You can't ever take the foot off the gas pedal. You gotta keep rolling.
Oh, that's for sure, man. That's a pretty wild path. I mean, I will say, not to blow myself, but it was like early on while you're telling the story, I'm like, there's got to be a cat or a dog or a fucking Persian hamster or some weird shit that's causing this. Like, but
we're good today. I'm around Maddie all the time. We're good. Yeah.
I am curious. I mean, what is it about doing the podcast that kept you so dedicated to it? Because to me, like there's, and to your point on the business thing, keeping the foot on the gas, yes, that's true, but you also need to know when to pivot, and there is a fine line between seeing things through and being dedicated and not giving up too early, but there's also diminishing returns wise, this is fucking stupid and I need to figure something else out. What is it about doing the show that kept you so fucking hard-lined into being dedicated to it through all of that instead of pivoting and doing something different?
So there's 3 things. Number 1, I didn't have a choice. I burned the boats. This had to work. There was no plan B. I am a believer in that. Like, you don't always succeed at everything. And like you said, sometimes you actually have to do the hard thing and pivot. But I never want to plan for that pivot ahead. I want to assume that's not an option. Number 2, I really enjoy what I do. I'm a generalist. I talk to people of all backgrounds. I could have in Mark Gagnon one day and Mike Ritland the next day.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah. No, but like for my lifelong ADHD, it's great to be able to do a lot of different things. I wouldn't be able to just do one thing. But that's the other part. Like, I get joy out of it. You get in rooms like this, you know how it is. It's like you kind of get locked off from the world. You get very honed in. You don't have the phone fucking buzzing every 5 seconds, and you really get to know someone, and you can do that through every lens when you're talking to someone for 3 hours. Most podcasts I have a mix of comedy, seriousness, depth, and even like education, depending on who it is. You know what I mean? Like, if they're an expert on something, they're educating people. And then sometimes when people are just telling their story, they're educating people through that experience. Like, it's the coolest thing ever. So I think I get to do the coolest thing ever. And I would take every tough part that comes with this 1,000,000 times over to be able to do it, because I watch people leave from my gym every morning on the way to their job that I know they hate. And I don't blame those people at all. I'm just glad, because I used to be one of those people, and I'm glad that I'm not now. And I took the chance and I figured it out. But the third part is, you know, I had said, and I'm still working on this, but I'm better than I used to be. I was always the guy who was like, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. You know, that's for other people. Like, that's not, I would never give myself credit for stuff. And it's even uncomfortable for me to talk out loud like this, but you're asking the question, and this is how it was. I remember when I was editing myself in those 6 months when I was building the podcast and I was recording 10 episodes over that time, I had so much trouble doing it because I would cringe every line, like, oh God, wow, that sounds awful, whatever. And then there was one night, could have been 1 a.m., 2 a.m., something like that. I'm editing an episode, and it was one of the solo ones. Of the 10 episodes I released, 8 of them were solo episodes, meaning me just talking to a camera. That was the other thing. I thought I was going to have to do like 35 of those before someone would come over to do this. But like, I released the first 10 and a bunch of people hit me up like, yo, I would come in. It's like, great. So I got to go to that guest model right away. But I was doing some of these solo episodes where I'd just, you know, riff with the cameras and talk about a certain topic, whatever it was. And it's all cringy, especially today. But there was one that I was editing, and I realized there was about a 10 to 15 minute period where I was just clicking the camera angles. And I was actually like listening. And it wasn't listening to like huff your own farts or whatever. But I paused it and like almost like came to with it. And I was like, all right, you're not terrible at this. Like, you can do this. These people that come up to you and say like, you should have a podcast, they might not be wrong here. This is doable. Like, you have a talent for that. And to relate it back to something when I was growing up, like I was the biggest sports fan ever. And I was a solid athlete, but not amazing. I wasn't going to go pro in anything. And I always wondered what like that day was like for, you know, like a freak, like an Allen Iverson.
Or they realize they're Allen Iverson, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Like Allen Iverson, who I grew up watching and was just the most amazing thing ever. He was listed at 6 foot. He was not even 5'10". He was listed at 165. That motherfucker was 150 soaking wet. And he's playing in an era with Shaq and putting up 30, 40 a night. I mean, and playing on some of the worst basketball teams I have ever seen in my life, where he's getting triple teamed and still putting up those numbers. And he was a dog. Like, he was just a dog. But he was this unbelievable athlete. The guy had like a 48-inch vertical. You know, he was just, he was silky smooth. He was so good that when he was in high school, he was a better football player than basketball player, and he liked football better. And then a lot of things happened, and he ended up pursuing basketball. But like, it wasn't even like his first love or his first thought, but he was this great at it. And I always wondered what it was like when they had that day. And by that day, I mean, was there a day when Allen Iverson was 15 or 16 years old, meaning he's already been playing pickup basketball for a decade, where he stepped on the court, you know, ran train on everyone, and then someone said, yo, how do you do that? Whatever that was. And he tried to show them, and he just was like, you just do this. And they all looked at each other like, what do you mean we can't just do that? And then he realized, like, oh shit, I can just do that. Because he's only ever known his body and what he can do. He's never been in someone else's body. And I always wondered what that was like. I never got to experience that as an athlete. But I didn't experience it in that moment. A few years later, though, I experienced that. And I realized, because it was a part of a conversation with someone else where they were literally asking me, like, oh, how do you do this or that? I'm like, you just do it. And when I looked at the tape, I'm like, damn, I don't have to think about that. That just happens. And so there was an understanding there. And I sit here today like I'm still trying to make it, right? Like we made good progress, but I got a long way to go to what I want to do. But it's like I know I can play with the biggest boys at the highest level. And I'm in a creative space, so I don't have to look at this like a sport. It's not like 32 teams where one team wins. A lot of different people can win. That's what I like about this industry. But like in the hypothetical game of like just how you compete, it's like, yeah, I can play at the highest level. I can beat everyone. And I look at it because I'm like, all I ever see are all the fucking mistakes you make in 3, 4, 5 hours talking with someone. And I'm like, holy shit, I have that much room for improvement. This is where we are right now. That's a good sign. Yeah. So yeah, there was a time where there was just that honest conversation, and it has to be an honest conversation. If I weren't good at it, I'd have to have that honest conversation. Like that thing, whatever that is, I don't have it for this. So is this business going to work? Maybe it wouldn't. You know, for me, I knew I'd find a way with it.
It's neat to hear you walk through that process and almost epiphany like, you know, moment to feeling like this is where I fit in. And I on the flip side, I find it kind of heartbreaking that I do think that for most people, they live their entire life never having that moment. Yeah. You know, and like you said, the people that go, you know, leave the gym and go to a job they hate because that's what they're good enough at to at least support themselves with, but that's all they have, you know, and that's fucking heartbreaking that most of our society, I think, lives that way.
It doesn't have to be all the time, and I agree with exactly the point you're making. The thing that I do try to check at the door, though, is that not everyone wants all the same things, right?
Sure.
Maybe someone, they don't really like their job, but they like every other aspect of their life, and the job is what allows them to have that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the world needs ditch diggers. You know, that's not a dig on the majority of society. I think to your point, it's whatever floats your boat. You know,
right.
If you're I just want to fucking pick up my lunchbox, punch the card, fucking do the thing, and then I can bowl and watch the game on Saturday or Sunday or whatever. Like, I'm good with that, and that makes me happy and great. But, you know, to me, to have that type of moment, though, like when we go back to kind of coming full circle to the first part of the conversation we've had, is that purpose thing. It's like there's more to life than just getting by and checking a few boxes.
That's right.
You know, in my opinion, anyway. I'm curious, from its inception, when you first decided, like, yes, I am going to do this, has your strategy in terms of who you have on, what you talk about, the overall direction of the show, what your goals are, has that evolved, or have you had kind of this idea of where you want to go and what you want to do with it all along, and it's stayed relatively the same?
From 30,000 feet in the air, it has all stayed exactly the same. Here's what I mean by that. Steve Jobs had this idea that, like, when you start, you know, something revolutionary, not to overstate this or anything, but start your own thing. Let's call it that. You got to have your 3 to 5 non-negotiables, meaning you are just betting your life on these things that they are the case, and Jesus Christ could come down and tell you that that's not the case, and you have to say, I'm sorry, sir, please go home, right? And for me, it is in person. I've released, at the time that this is going to be released, it'll be 330 some episodes. They have all been in person. For me, it was going to be long form. You know, different things work for different people. I'm not good in a prepared question environment. It's just not me, right? Like there's just different styles to do it. I know I got to flow with people and just kind of create that river and then create the estuaries off it, and it'll go where it goes. So I knew that. I knew that I wanted it to, like I said, it was starting with some solo episodes, but I knew as soon as possible, you know, I can do that. I have the skill to do that. That's kind of cool. I don't like talking to the walls and the cameras. I like talking with people, right? I like bouncing ideas off people or having them bounce ideas off me. So I wanted to also have it be a guest podcast. I also wanted to really be able to cover any topic, and that's the part where I'm going to come back down to 10,000 feet and talk about where you have to be careful with evolution, or not be careful, where you have to evolve with the times to get your long-term plan to fruition. And what I mean by that is, to keep it round numbers, if there are 150 different topics I want to cover on my podcast, at the beginning of my podcast, the first 86 episodes I did. The qualifications to be on my show in the first 86 episodes were, can you breathe and does your mouth open sometimes?
And will you do it?
Right.
Yeah.
That was it, and I was fortunate to get some amazing people in there, and then a lot of amazing friends who supported this thing and made it possible. And while I was doing that, the only reason I exist today is because I was able to invent like a new way to do podcast clips and go very viral with that. So I knew if I had someone in there for 3 hours, even if at the beginning of the show that meant I was going to have to do a lot more talking, than I do now, that's fine. As long as we're going back and forth for 3 hours, something's going to happen in there. I'll cut it up. We'll get it out there and figure out what happens. And so that's what I did. And then that got me an audience going crazy viral with shorts. And so once that happened, now I over time, from episode 87 to 200, I started to have to hone in and say, all right, if there's 150 things I want to talk about, well, there's really 40 to 50 I can do. And I'm like, if the spigot is like this, I'm going to do this to kind of hone in to build that show. I'm not going to niche myself out as much money as that would make me if I did. I'd be a lot wealthier now if I did. I'm going to keep it wide enough that I'm a generalist. And then as I continue to grow the audience, I'm going to open it all the way back up again and eventually do whatever I want to do. And I say that because you and I were talking a little bit before camera. We're in a moment right now with podcasting in particularly. I'd say YouTube content in general, but let's focus on podcasts, where the supply, without me looking at stats, maybe people in the comment sections can help me with exact numbers right here, but the supply of podcasts since even 2023, don't go back to 2020, 2023, is up at least 100%. You have all kinds of people who have fame in other things who are throwing, $200,000 at a show to set up a studio and bring on connections that they have that are big guests that might help in the algorithm, which is fine. They're allowed to do that. But you have an enormous supply increase with the demand actually reduced. I started seeing numbers. Sometimes I'm a little bit like Rain Man, and I don't mean that as a compliment, to be honest with you, but like I have a photographic memory, so I just kind of run through things on data, and I can kind of see some patterns. And I saw patterns in like December 23, January 24, February 24. I would talk with Danny Jones about this a lot, but I saw patterns that the view ceilings were coming down across the board on a lot of podcasts. And I was right about that until the election season came up, which now in hindsight looks like that kind of last ditch to where suddenly everyone had their eyes on podcasts because of the role it was playing in the election happening. You had this big spike, and then it kind of continued the downtrend once we got to January 25. And we've seen that throughout this year. So just very rough guesstimation numbers, you have a supply that's up 100% or whatever it is since 2023, and you probably have a total supply of views, meaning in this case demand, that for the industry is at 70% the level it was a couple years ago. Because I think a lot of people are like a little bit podcasted out. I'm talking about the audience, which I fully understand that. So unfortunately right now, this is not the case with Spotify, but YouTube's king. And with YouTube, the emphasis has gone far too much on click-through rate over watch time. And in English, for people out there who aren't YouTubers, average watch time is exactly what it sounds like. That's the average amount of time someone watches a video. I think that should be the most important thing. Click-through is the percentage of time someone clicks a video. And so let's use round numbers. If I have a video come out of the gate in the first 2 hours, after 2 hours of it being public, the click-through is 6.0%. And I have another video come out at 5.0%. The difference in my views at 2 hours is not 17%, which is the difference between 5 and 6. It's 50% or 60%. It is exponential to the upside and the downside. So a video gets affected exponentially downward when the click-through is not high enough, and it gets affected exponentially upward when it's very high. But now even that ceiling has lowered, so you can't do the views you could have done on those numbers 2 years ago. So it's a giant squeeze right now. And I don't like how much time I have to spend on titling. I don't like where YouTube titles have gone and how you have to do stuff. Our rule is that it has to be accurate. And the next rule is whatever the most ridiculous thing we can do after that, where it's still accurate, is what we have to do. Let me give a prime example of this so people can spell it out. I did, one of my favorite episodes this year was with my friend Mark Gagnon, who's a great comedian. He's also on Flagrant with Andrew Schultz, co-host that show. And he's got his own show, Camp Gagnon, which is great. People should check that out. But Mark came on, and we had a 3-hour just cultural commentary, back and forth, pure comedy episode. It was great. Loved it. I never know what people are going to talk about, like specifically before they come in there. But I'm like, all right, Mark's into stories and stuff like that. We'll get something. So there's about 10 minutes in there where he talks about a lost Rockefeller heir who was allegedly eaten by cannibals. So I said, okay, there's the beginning of my title and there's my thumbnail. And so the beginning of the title is like the mysterious lost Rockefeller heir, comma, Kanye, comma, whatever, just cultural commentary stuff. And the title says, they ate the Rockefeller alive. And the episode did pretty well. If I had titled that Mark Gagnon on it would have 20% of the views it has. That's not healthy. I hate that. I also don't like that for the audience. What I do bet on with my videos, and I hope I'm right most of the time, is that the people are, when they get there, are going to love the content so much that they don't even remember what the title was. But it sucks that I have to think that way. So there's a big squeeze right now. Like you even see it with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan gets beat by a lot of people on YouTube with numbers, which is crazy because Joe is still doing, not that he even cares. I mean, he's the godfather of space. He's a billionaire. But he's still doing the dream for me. That's the dream. The dream is number, guest. That's your title. If it were up to me, that's what every title would be, and it would be a picture of the person on the thumbnail. That's it. I wish I didn't, because I make all my thumbnails. I wish I didn't sit there and make 40 different thumbnails and measure whether or not the spacing is -50 or -125 or up here -85, and if I have 3 syllables right there versus 4 right. It's sick. I hate it. I can't fight City Hall, though. That's kind of how it is. So I know like you have Eric and Mario now as well. Like I've known Eric for a long time. He's extremely astute at YouTube. Like he knows it too. He and I have talked about it. We've seen this happening over the last couple of years. My hope is that this will squeeze out all the people who are unserious about having a podcast. People who don't have the staying power someone like you has doing this for the last 8-9 years. And frankly, some people who they're good at other things, but they're not necessarily good at this, but they can kind of buy their way into the industry. If that's not paying off for them, they're going to stop. And I think when that happens and we get a little bit more of a healthy supply, you'll see some of the rhetoric of like titling go down a little bit. And to YouTube's credit, they'll bet on things for a while and not be right, and then kind of reset it and be right about some things. They've even done that on cringy cultural stuff where they were censoring people and now they're not. So let's keep that going, by the way. It's weird. It's strange when it's like Google and,
community guidelines.
Right. They're like their own country, basically. That doesn't get not scary to me. But, when it comes to style of what content's push and what's not, they've adjusted over the years. They've had some down periods with decisions there and up periods with it. So I can't fight City Hall, like I said. I can't fight the algorithm. We'll keep riding what we can here.
I appreciate you putting all the backdrop onto that, because I think so many of the components that you just outlined are things that very few people realize, that how much there is to all of that. Mm-hmm. And I agree in that I wish that it wasn't that way, and there's very few channels that can get away with being that unintentional about their thumbnails or just the content in general that they're putting out. It's like, oh, I'm interested in this, and this guy knows it, so fucking sit down and let's talk about it, and here's what it is.
That's right.
That's how it should be, but I agree, like, it isn't that simple for most channels, or they're just going to fucking nosedive to the point where it's like, what's the point? But I also think, it's one of those almost chicken or the egg things to a certain extent, and that the reality of it is YouTube, even though they are kind of their own country and they're entitled to censor it however the fuck they want, and you can either like it and abide by it or start another one or go somewhere else or whatever, but because they're Google essentially and or Google-like in terms of their dominance. I mean, they're the Bitcoin of the podcast space. Like they tower over everybody so much to where it's not even really a competition, and so if you want to be in the space, like, you have to figure out how to play their game, and I think for them, like, at the end of the day, it's still a business. They're still vying for advertising dollars, and they want to do what is going to get people to watch and pay attention and have their eyeballs on the screen.
This is the one thing I don't understand, though, Mike. When they demonetize stuff, for the dumbest reasons, by the way. I had a video demonetized because the guest talked about when he was smoking weed when he was 15 years old. And it's so sick that I edited to make sure that the camera was on me. I personally did this. Every time he did the mouth movement while he was telling the story, which now, sorry, if that just got you demonetized. But I'm like, I get it. You have shareholders to respond to. You're fucking Google, though. If some company, I don't care how big they are, comes to you and complains and says, how dare you throw this automatic ad on this video where this guy talked about neo-Nazis or something. First of all, Google didn't know that happened. The algorithm did it. Secondly, I don't think anyone's associating Walmart with, like, the neo-Nazis when they see it pop up as a mid-roll ad on a Richard Spencer. I don't even think he's on YouTube, but like on a video like that. And anyone that does.
Or Nick Fuentes rant.
Right, yeah. Anyone that actually associates that brand with that person, I can't really help you. But it's like, if you're going to get this upset about it, if companies are going to get upset about it, if I were Google and I were their CEO, and a company came to me and said, how dare my ad show, we're going to pull our advertising from Google, I'd say, go right the fuck ahead. Where are you going to go?
I don't even think it's, I don't think it's that. I honestly think it's more the feeling and the preference and the mood that those people are in.
Yeah.
I really do, because to your point, they can, fucking go somewhere else. I don't give a shit. They could do that very easily, and companies would say, okay, never mind, we don't care. I think it's just their personal preference and what they like and don't like. I really do. I mean, because gun stuff, the same thing, right? It's a huge fucking industry. If they allowed unfettered gun content, or especially drug content, like, you'd have every fucking teenager in the country watching videos on fill in the blank with whatever gets demonetized, whatever. Like, it's not, I don't think, about popularity, and even kind of dovetailing on that, because they're so successful, they have the luxury of saying, I don't like that, so no. I think it's more that than it is them kowtowing to advertisers. I really do. I'd love to get a fucking Google exec on here or a YouTube guy, but they're like the fucking, they're the ghosts of the world. It's
North Korea, bro.
Yeah, nobody knows who any of those people are, which is fascinating. And in today's day and age, how hard it is to remain anonymous. Like, I don't know how these people do it, but maybe it's because they're behind Google.
You just got to find them, zip tie them, hood them, bring them in here and say, we're just going to chat. Yeah. We got him back, by the way.
I know. He's coming back here in a couple of weeks.
No, I mean, we got him back on that.
You zip-tied him to a chair?
It wasn't executed very well, but yeah.
We paid the piper.
We did that.
So I am curious, and this I promise this isn't meant to be a dig, but without having been in the military or law enforcement, do you ever find that is a challenge? And I have my theory, which I'll share afterwards, but a challenge in terms of interviewing a lot of the guys that you've had on. Or are you just a PSYOP, state-sponsored spy? Are you a spy? Is that what's going on?
No, that's Andy Bustamante's job.
That's right.
I will tell you this as an aside before I answer that question. I much prefer having people come on where it's on their resume. So when Andy Bustamante comes on, it's on his resume. He was in CIA. He claims to have left. Probably didn't. Tell him that all the time. But you know what you're dealing with. I think in our business, this isn't to like put on too much of a tinfoil hat, but sometimes with certain content, certain little niches you may cover within all the things that at least I do on my show, I'm sure a guy like you runs into it even more than me. Like, it's when someone comes on where that's not on their resume, and then they leave your studio, and you're like, I just talked to them for 3 hours. Why did something feel weird there? And there's one that I'm not going to say who it was because I can't prove it. But there's one time where I had someone in who none of that was anywhere near their resume. No one would even guess who this person was because it was totally off the beaten path. But I was like, no, something's wrong there. Who the hell are they working for? And it's not to be paranoid, but, you know, I think all media is the same in that way. We see it in mainstream media. Why would you not see it in independent media? There's little messaging. You know, I saw like Sean had a clip with a guy maybe 6 months ago. Who was I just talking about? Dalton Fisher and I were talking about this. But, you know, he straight up said to the guy, it was like a Russian guy who it's sort of on his resume. He had been an asset of CIA at one point. And Sean was like, you know, I feel like maybe you would have just come here just to say that thing right there. Like, I'm starting to think that in my head. It was just one comment this guy made in 4 hours. And the guy went, no, me never. But it's like, that's all it could be sometimes. Someone builds a lot of credibility for 90 minutes and then they just toss in one little whatever that just moves public perception a little bit. That's a little scary. But to your actual full question about, is it hard? How did you put it? Like, is it hard?
Do you ever find it, I don't want to say intimidating because you don't come across as being intimidated by interviewing anybody, but a challenge to not even necessarily relate, but, you know, to me, like if I have a guy on with a very similar background, I would even argue in a bad way. And the reason I ask is because I think that it's actually really cool seeing you interview these guys and not fellow vet bros because you're not bound by any of these guardrails. Whereas as me, even subconsciously, right, like there's kind of an alleyway that we're going to go down, and it's harder for me, frankly, to go outside of that because we have such similar experiences to pull from. Do you ever find it a challenge, or is it more the opposite where it's like, no, this is fucking great because I can ask them whatever and the sky's the limit?
It's really the latter, but there's also, I have a real reverence for that, especially with the military guys. You know, you guys weren't drafted. You made a decision to do that too. When I'm talking with guys from the modern day like you, and I have a real constant self-awareness of I don't fucking know what I don't fucking know, and I haven't been in those shoes. And if there are people whose opinions I'm going to let run a little farther and hold above my own while they're in my studio, that's at the top of my list is those guys, because they've seen the world that I've been lucky enough to be protected from. Thinking of the worst things that happen in this country, a lot of which I haven't had to see, by the way. I've been protected from that too. But like even those things, and there's some bad shit that happens. The scale with which things like that and worse happen around the world is monumentally farther tilted in other places. And I have such an understanding of that. What I can't know is what it's like to be at those things and witness it and see it and then have to live with it and also understand the life and death that you see happening around you all the time, whether it be your own guys or the people on the ground. So I'm not intimidated at all by these guys. I just respect you guys. And I hope that comes across. And sometimes we do have to talk about hard things. And sometimes we do have to talk about things where I objectively disagree with the person. Like when I have Dale Comstock on, Dale's got an insanely different worldview than I do, right? But like, there's some of that where I can just be like, all right, I disagree with that. That's fine. And then there's other things where like, he's taken you to a place where you see it in his eyes. He's back there right now and it's playing like the movie, step by step, play by play. And you're like, all right, I think that's probably how it is. So I'm sitting here in an armchair. My chair doesn't even have arms back there. So, you know, you gotta check your ego at the door. That's probably one of the things that bothers me sometimes with people online spouting opinions. Opinions are fine. It's a part of culture. But goddamn, do people talk about everything in an absolute, like they know it, and that's what it is. And like, you don't. There's a reason I don't have a big following on Twitter. It's because 99.9% of the tweets I type out never get sent. And there's even still some I sent. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. You know, I'm very, very self-critical with that. So with you guys, you know, when we're going, especially the modern history, going through the war on terror, I've always said this. I said it with you on your episode. I'll say it on every military episode I do. I don't blame the guys who had to go do the job that they were commanded to do by people in D.C. for the decisions that people in suits in D.C. make out of their own whatever it is. What I really do appreciate is when I can get the stories where people understand what it is you guys go through, so that there's an appreciation for that at home, where I can get the stories where you guys objectively did really protect the world of something so people can appreciate that you do that. And where I also get the perspective that you guys will be able to comment on these things after the fact and say, okay, now that I'm not in it, knowing what I know and knowing the variables and decisions that were made, here's things that if I were sitting in those offices in DC, I would have never fucking done. And here's why. And I think so many people at home appreciate that. And that's where content can really help, because it puts a name with the face, and people who may be extremely anti-war, which, you know, that's fine. I do live in reality, by the way, though. I know you can't, it sucks, but, you know, war is a reality of the human race. That said, you know, people who just don't want to see war happen, which I would consider myself that, but people who are like that no matter what, they can at least look at guys like Mike Ritland and see you as a person and hear you talk about the things you did and the decisions you made to get yourself in those positions and the risks you took. And I know that the average person who's not a scumbag is going home saying, I appreciate that guy. Yeah. I totally disagree with the decisions my government has made and whatever, but it's not that guy's fault.
I mean, it's nice to hear you say it, and to your question, it for sure comes across, you know, which is part of why I wanted to have you on, is that I actually really enjoy that kind of third perspective that you bring to the table, and being able to critically think through follow-up questions, and I think one, you know, if I had to pinpoint, like, in my opinion, I guess the most important aspect of somebody interviewing somebody is the ability to listen, to understand, and not just fucking respond. Yes. You know, sometimes you have to respond, or you should respond, or it makes sense to. There are times where you don't, and I think a good host understands the difference between those two of when it makes sense to and when not. And but ultimately, whether you respond or not is not listening with the intent in doing so. One of the things you brought up about the podcast space, or, you know, we'll say independent creators, it is a unique time in our nation's history, or in our species' history, where there is such a, I won't say unfettered, I would say a far less fettered aspect of media. There is still, I mean, there are entire channels that are psyops, or that are created by entities with a very specific goal of swaying opinion one way or the other, or whatever. Mm-hmm. With this being kind of a new battlefield, if you will, of psyops, I guess, if you want to call it that, have you ever noticed with the people that you've had on, conversations that you've posted, that there's ever been any weird shit after the fact, whether it's feeling, you know, electronic stuff being fucked with or being followed, or like anything like that has been a result of a show you've aired?
I really try not to live in paranoia. If I got shot on the street for a podcast I did, I think that's kind of a good story. Whatever, good way to go out. I'm just like a little...
Well, he died doing what he loved.
Did what he loved. Got shot by some spy somewhere. But, you know, there was one situation... and it's the only... There was one. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be vague about this. I just don't want to make it a story. I don't think it would be, but just in case. There was one situation where people's actions didn't line up with what they were saying, and it was that situation I was talking about a few minutes ago. I realized, was able to figure something out, I believe. Again, I don't have the concrete proof, so it's not fair for me to publicly air that, but that was the one spooky moment where I went, whoa. You know. I called Jim DiOrio, and I was like, hey, buddy.
Can you sanity check this shit?
Yeah, am I okay here? Yeah. And, you know Jim, he took care of business there. But, yeah, that was a moment where I'm like, dude, I'm a kid in New Jersey who's like, not even at the time, 2 years out of my parents' house. I don't even have any money to show for this stuff. I ain't a billionaire like Joe Rogan. I can't have 8 Delta Force guys following me around and guarding me and stuff, which it sucks that you got to think like that, but you do got to think like that, I guess, in that type of position. Yeah, come on. What are we, how much are we moving the needle here? Why is this person coming around with me? And it was really uncomfortable. But I try not to let that impact how I think about people moving forward, but you have to have a little bit of a...
Yeah, I mean, you have to be cognizant of it. Because the reality is that, you know, anybody who comes on your show and you air that episode, like there is an element of responsibility for putting it out there. There's only so much vetting you can do, which we'll get into here in a second, but...
Yeah, that's
was it just a bad feeling, or did something happen afterwards that...
Yeah, something happened afterwards unrelated to the podcast that at first I was like, okay, no problem. And then I was like, oh no, I don't believe that. I'm sorry people, I'm being so vague, but I gotta be vague on this. And I talked to a couple people close to me about it, and they agreed with me. They're like, that's off. That's way off. And then, you know, like I said, I don't have the definitive proof, but like, if I took this to court as a prosecutor, I could win a jury.
Yeah.
I got enough for something like that. And it was enough that Jim DiOrio was like, I'm making some phone calls on this one. And he did. And it's just like, you talk about vetting. Maybe we should, I don't know if this is what you want to do, but it's a good segue to get into it right now. I've made mistakes on that before. I do my best with it. I've gotten better with it over time. Things happen fast. For 3.5 years, it was only me doing this thing. So it's like you're catching a million balls in the air. And even today, I only have 2 guys working with me. And, you know, they're both in that respect when it comes to vetting people and stuff like that. They're learning from me on that. So it's like we still have a light system. I don't have... This is one place where actually mainstream media... Not that they use it correctly, to be clear, but they have an advantage because they got 20 producers to go through everything or whatever, and then if they want to lie about it, they lie about it. But if they want to be truthful about it and be like, this person qualified, this person not, they can. Whereas me, I'm catching things all the time, like, oh, all right, yeah, we can do Tuesday at 12? All right, yeah, hold on, let me... And it gets filed away, and then... Maybe you're thinking about it later and you're like, I shouldn't have done that one. And I haven't had a ton of those. It's a handful.
Well, yeah, so on that point, agreed, like you can only vet and similarly, like we do our best at it, you know, and especially with guys like with similar backgrounds or anything in government or law enforcement or, you know, 3-letter agency type stuff. I'm fortunate, you know, to know a lot of people, you know, in every facet of the government that, you know, if I run a name by somebody and they know them, they can say, yeah, dude's good to go or not, or, you know,
right.
You know, and that carries a lot of weight. Now, that's not a foolproof way of making sure that whoever the guest is going to be completely honest. And similarly, like, you know, this has come up a lot lately, especially in the veteran space of, different guys telling stories that are either embellished or completely fucking false, just flat out lies, and then in some instances, coming back on the hosts of like, why the fuck did you have this guy? You clearly lied. And, and so I'm curious, like, knowing that there's only so much you can do, it's not like an ABC presidential debate where there's a team of fucking people in a back room live fact checking, what somebody's saying as they're saying it. It's like, I wasn't there. My bullshit meter can get pegged and be like, dude, I know enough to know that what you're saying doesn't fucking add up. But it's also like, this is you and your reputation. It's
right.
Again, like I can only do the best of my ability. But in the instances where it's verified that somebody was on your show, lied about a story, what do you do about it? And what is your take? Do you put a disclaimer that, hey, some of these statements have been proven to be false, watch at your own discretion, blah, blah, blah? Do you leave it alone? Do you pull it? How do you navigate that?
I haven't had to deal with that where it's 100% proven a ton. I've done both, though. I've done it. I don't want to get into specific instances and open up cans of worms, but I have spoken publicly before on some situations. And then there are others where I've had to say, I just got to eat this L.
And pull it?
No, I haven't. There's 3 episodes from my library that are not on YouTube. They're all on Spotify. That'd be episode, let me think here. I think it's episode 157, 168, and 169.
And the one I was on.
No, the one you're on was good. And it actually, those, even 168 and 169, where there were some issues publicly with that guest afterwards. It doesn't have to do with the guests. It had to do with something else. There were initially 5 episodes that were pulled. That was 2 years ago. There was a problem on YouTube. It wasn't anybody's fault, but had to do with like outside bot campaigns coming in. So I actually... We were talking about knowing people at YouTube. I couldn't get to anyone at YouTube on that, but I got to some people who understood YouTube, and they're like, you need to pull these 5 episodes, and then there were 2 of them we were able to put back up, and 3, they're just going to be on Spotify. But no, I haven't pulled episodes, but there are some where things totally out of my control happened after the fact that it's like, well, I don't want to make I abhor public controversy. I understand that's like the easiest way to build online. I've known that since before I do this. I don't do it. I stay away from it at all costs. There was one time where I got caught up in a public controversy where I had to punch back rather than, punch first. I should have punched first on that one. But I hate it in all its kinds. And so there are just some times where I'm like, you know what? This person deserves to get my, public shaming of them done. But instead, I will just eat this L and quietly go about my business and not associate with this person again.
Yeah.
And it's a more peaceful way to live. I do think audiences are smarter than they're given credit for. I think they can smell it on some people sometimes. Sometimes you can't, and it's not their fault. People can talk really well and talk around things. My buddy Paul Rosalie, who's awesome. He's lived in the middle of the Amazon jungle for 2 decades now, like trying to protect it, and has done an incredible job. And people don't even see the stuff that he deals with down there that he doesn't talk about. But I was talking with him a few months ago, and he said, here's the thing about podcasts, because he's out there. He lives in the middle of the Amazon jungle. He's separated from society in that way, but he does social media because that's how he draws attention to this thing, but he's selective with who he talks to and what he does. He's very specific about content, and he's very cynical about like any creators and stuff like that. And he's got his own backstory as to why that is. But he's like, here's the one problem with long-form podcasts, which he likes. He'll go through the Amazon on walks and listen to long-form podcasts. But he's like, You get someone in there for a few hours, and they're a normal person. And they laugh at things. They crack funny jokes. They, all shuck some stuff. And then they work in some ideas, and because you like them, you kind of want to get along with them, and you want to agree with them or whatever. And he's like, but sometimes, like, even if they're not a bad person, their ideas are terrible and have massive ramifications. And then sometimes they really are just a bad person who can kind of seem like a normal guy for a few hours. And he said any podcast that he has ever listened to, doesn't matter who they are, whether it's Joe Rogan on down, at some point, these long-form podcasts, that happens with someone. And I thought about it, and I think he's 100% right. I'm like, you know what? And it doesn't mean, like, the context of what we were talking about it doesn't mean he was right on that one or whatever, but in general, could I see exactly where he's coming from, and can I see how that happens? Because a huge part of what makes me able to do the job is the fact that I can relate to people and empathize with them and, be conversational rather than confrontational and stuff. Can I see how that can have a downside to it? Absolutely. And so that's something I think about a lot. And I don't then let myself fall into the trap of like saying, all right, I better be confrontational the minute I hear something I don't like. But there's a level of responsibility there because I am a firm believer that we in independent media have been given a huge responsibility here that largely we earned, and the other half of it or third of it, whatever, is the mainstream blew it and lost everyone's trust, righteously so, such that now we have this big voice and this big opportunity, and I do not want to see us blow it. And does that mean that within independent media, you can't have media that is clearly left-wing or clearly right-wing? No, I think that's fine. But say that. Don't, if you're left-wing, don't call yourself a journalist. If you're right-wing, don't call yourself a journalist. Call yourself a commentator and be open about that. I think shows that do a great job of that would be like Sean Ryan. Sean Ryan is very clearly conservative. He's very open about that. He's talked to people from both sides, by the way, which I think is great. Even had fucking Gavin Newsom on. Better man than me, But we have this responsibility, I think, to actually seek truth and not seek outcomes that we want based on our political beliefs. Now, that's easier for me to say because my political beliefs are extremely moderate. I have firm disagreements with liberal friends and firm disagreement with conservative friends. It'd be harder for me to say, I would imagine, if I leaned one way or another clearly hard. But you got to look at the bigger picture with things. And so I hope that we don't do the opposite reaction to the action here. So let's just call a spade a spade. If the initial action was woke ideology that also infected the media, that's very bad. It's very bad. I mean, it's cringe beyond belief. It's culturally destructive. Let's not course correct, though, and make the law Nick Fuentes. And I usually don't like just putting a name on it or whatever. But, like, you got to find more reasonable people.
Yeah, don't overcorrect.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think if that is where things go, things happen like this. And they kind of go like that, right? And I've just been really concerned over the past 6 months with conversations with normal people that I have off camera, not guests, not podcast guests, just normal people, be it, someone that works the front desk at the store, a lawyer, like you name it. The things that people are so openly saying as if it's normal strikes me with the same kind of cringiness as when people were doing that with woke language.
Yeah.
But now it's from the other side, and I'm like, okay, let's pull this, but let's pull the speedometer back here a little bit. I agree that was bad. Let's not give the people who want that exactly what they want.
Yeah.
And it's not to start problems or call people out, but like yeah, I do find it funny. I've experimented with the Twitter algorithm a lot over the last like 6-7 years. When Dorsey had it, all the way through Musk having it. Over the past 6 to 8 months, every time a Nick Fuentes video or even the words Nick Fuentes come up on my feed, I do not watch it, and I hit the 3 dots, do not recommend, and I give a different reason every fucking time. And it shows up on my feed again and again and again and again and again. That is not natural. Sorry. It's not natural. Who's doing that? Why? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But when I see things like that, I'm like, this is enemy at the gate stuff. This is exactly what woke did. Now this is happening over here. This is how we turn society in on itself. Because then if you go outside and you touch grass, you realize a lot of people aren't on Twitter. I always talk about like the Wawa law. You have Wawas out here?
No, but I know what you're talking about.
So like when I was doing this podcast in my parents' house, basically locked in there for 3.5 years, I'd go to pick up people at the airport. I mean, I gave up my whole social life with this. And things were getting so weird online that like you'd go outside and breathe the air. I would stop at Wawa to get gas and like some protein bars or something with a guest, and I would just observe. And you would see the girl with pink hair and 3 nose rings hold the door for the Vietnam veteran hat guy and smile at each other and say, hey, have a great day. I know they vote totally opposite, but they got along just fine. On Twitter, those 2 people would be calling each other the Antichrist. So you have to realize it's not like that. But if you want to create a bad culture where people are just fighting with each other and the masses, have their bread and circus while the elites make their own decisions that really matter while they're not looking. This is how I would do it. I would inject, the Joy Reids of the world into the algorithm that just make you want to jump off your closest bridge. And then I'd follow that up by injecting a Nick Fuentes in. I just want to find whatever's in the middle of that. Like the average of that might, those are 2 major forces. They come together in the middle. You might actually find something half decent, but it's tough sometimes. And I'm not trying to start problems or get people yelling about different creators or whatever, but, try to find the things that are rooted a little bit more in, I don't know, maybe decency is the word. That feels like a little light, but you know what I mean. Like try to find the stuff that's not so incendiary.
Oh, for sure I do. And in that same vein, I'm curious. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it already, but obviously as a show gains in popularity, the bigger it gets, the more this becomes a reality, whether you want it to or not. What responsibility do you feel like, a popular podcast channel has to ensure that the guest is truthful and or that the content that they're putting out there is not PSYOP,
Right.
a state-sponsored, actor that's coming on to sway a population, or somebody just intentionally stirring the pot or whatever. Like what onus do you put on that show to do that?
There has to be some onus. I'm thinking about myself right now. There has to be some. And that goes back to the example where I'm like, it's easier when it's right out there in the open. It's on their resume. It's like a giant waiver right there. You're talking, this guy was in CIA and says he's still not, but probably is. Like that makes it easier when it's other people. Yeah, I think you have to be as careful as you can. Not to the point, though, that you just automatically just try to disagree with everything they say or push back on every single thing they say. There has to be a conversational flow and an understanding. And I do think there has to be like some trust in the masses eventually landed on the right stuff. That's why I think like eventually this woke versus anti-woke era will end. And it'll just be a small minority of people still fighting over that. And the average person will be like, you know what? I'm going to go outside, have my Corona, hang with my friends, not vote for things I don't believe in, and call it a day. That would be the perfect scenario. So I kind of view my job and our job as doing our best to let the truth be revealed, be it in what people actually say or how they're then viewed for saying it. You know, you don't have, there's some times, and I'm sure you've seen this, where someone says something that is so objectively disprovable with basic evidence that you don't need to come back to it, because Mike in the comments section is all over that shit, and it's gonna have 1.3 thousand likes in the first 2 days on that comment, you know, and people will wake up to that.
So with that, if you have a guest on, whether you have had this happen or hypothetically, you know patently it's false, like they're completely full of shit, do you let that ride or do you push back on it?
Depends on, it's a vibe check in the moment. I do a lot of pushback. And then there's some times where I crack a joke. It's very clear. Or it's so obvious that I'm like, they just hung themselves. I don't need to like tighten the noose. They're already dead. Like there are times with that. But then there's other times where I push back. And there's been a couple times where I push back hard. And afterwards I'm like, you know what? I didn't need to do that. That was a mistake. And then there's some times where I push back. I'm like, that was right. Yeah. That needed to happen. Here's what we got after that. Here's how the back and forth went. Here was the kicker on the end. Game, set, match. That's it. I don't like to do things at all for gotcha. At all. But like, if you're going to come with a claim, you better come correct. You got to have good evidence. When you don't, you know, it's not going to end well for you, whether that's me doing the job myself or it being made very clear to anyone with half a brain such that no one ever listens to anything you say again, which I see that happen.
Do you read comments and take any advice from them?
Yes. Yeah, I think I'm a huge believer in finding the diamond in the rough, right? So the average commenter is going to be slanted negative, because that tends to be the human emotion that yields you wanting to react and have a voice, especially from behind a keyboard. And the average commenter, therefore, is going to exaggerate a lot of things. And when you grow, you're going to have haters. It's actually a critical part of growing. If you don't have haters, you're not growing. But sometimes within that criticism, you'll find little kernels that you see again and again from people, and you're like,
They're probably on to something.
Maybe they're on to something there. I won't go into specifics, but I look at that very carefully, and there's actually something I'm working on right now that I think people have a good point on. And the last 10, 15 episodes, I've done a way better job with it, and now I'm trying to make that a pattern. So yeah, I think you have to find that back 2 to 5% where there's real criticism that can help. I think if you start just huffing your own farts and assuming, you know, oh, I got this or whatever, that can be dangerous. You should always be looking to improve your craft.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a product the same way a fucking tube of toothpaste is, and if everybody hates the way it tastes, you should probably listen to them. It is tough sometimes to, I think, distinguish between people that are just trolling for negative energy and attention versus an actual criticism that's valid or worth considering.
Right.
We've talked about it a little bit, but you know, as YouTube channels and podcasts in particular become the number one trusted news source for millions of people. I mean, not everybody, but there's millions of people who say that's where I get my news and information from. Do you feel as though we have become soft targets for the PSYOP type of environment, whether it's internally here, domestic, or even internationally, of intentionally trying to plant?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any evidence of that or accusations?
Like, I'll go back to the one I'm thinking of.
I think you should just say who that was. Obviously, he's been on the show, right? People could probably deductively reason.
I don't think people would figure this one out.
Really?
No. Yeah. Whoever I can think of, like, who the 5 culprits would be that people would be thinking. and it is none of those people.
So it would surprise people to know who you're talking about.
Yeah. We are definitely a target for stuff. Now, do I think it's really irresponsible to just call everything you disagree with a fucking psyop? Yeah. And I just think that that's a huge trend online right now. Every time someone does something, oh, this is a CIA podcast, oh, this is a what, and it's like, all right, dude, whatever. But yeah, I mean, we've seen how the mainstream media for decades has been infiltrated with interests and messaging and small. It's like flicking the little domino on that meme, and then that little domino moves the whole thing, and everything falls. And we've seen that again and again there. And to arrogantly think that we wouldn't be a target of that, especially when a lot of us have far fewer resources than big corporations do, would be crazy. So I think about it, but I also do a lot of content that has nothing to do with that stuff. And that's where it gets weird, because you still have to be vigilant. Like, maybe a comedian would go on there and someone told them something before, they don't even know. And they're like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then they work it into the conversation. That starts to become a conversation in the public. And that's something that for some reason was, you know what I mean, that was wanted to be in the public. You never know. You can't stop all of it. You can do as much checking ahead as possible, and you're not going to stop all of it. But should you be vigilant of things that are glaringly obvious? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you ever had a guest walk out, or as soon as they walk out of your studio, and you think to yourself, what in the fuck just happened?
Yeah, once.
Is it the same one we're talking about?
No.
Can you say who that is?
Yeah, it was Ashton Forbes in episodes 168 and 169. That was the one time we had public drama. That was back in November 2023. It was a long week and a half.
What was the issue?
He is an investigator of the MH370 disappearance. We just didn't see eye to eye on it. We ended up doing a 3.5-hour Twitter Spaces on Black Friday 2023 at the height of this online drama. I mean, fucking Keemstar got involved. Like, you get Keemstar involved in what you're doing. Like, that is not my lane. That is not what I want. But I was exasperated at that point, and then in that Spaces, I said everything I needed to say. We even had some peaceful talks towards the end of it. And since then, I've stayed out of it. And I wish him nothing but the best. I hope he finds whatever happened in that plane. There are things that I would handle differently today, for sure, and I have said that before, but I'll say that again. I don't think you should ever look at a situation like that and say, I was definitely faultless. I think that's dangerous, especially when emotions get in the middle of it, and emotions got in the middle of that. I have a very far fuse, right? It takes a lot to get me angry. But when you cross that fucking fuse, I get really mad. And that was the one time in my career where I got really mad. And it was a really good lesson, because there were parts of it that were avoidable. And the whole thing was my fault at the beginning, because I didn't vet him at all before I came on. And that's not a commentary on his legitimacy or lack of legitimacy. It's a commentary on whether or not it was a fit for me to talk with him. And if I had done that before I booked the tickets and invited him, I would not have had him on, and we would have avoided this whole thing.
Is there a singular thing that led to that, or is it like the whole scenario that is too long to try to explain?
I had fundamental disagreements with how he was going about this investigation, how certain things were being handled. And this was this was the kind of thing where, like, the day before, I'm like, wait, who the fuck do I have coming in tomorrow? All right, let me go look at this. And I looked at stuff on social media. I was like, oh. And I just had some fundamental disagreements. And my goal, and this you've already lost if this is your goal. My goal was to get him in there the next day, help him through it, not have any headlines, put this one behind me, and not have any damage done to either of us. That was my goal. And that is not what happened. I think that could have happened if certain things hadn't happened after we recorded. But yeah, there were some things that happened after, and like I said, I've already discussed all this stuff publicly, and I just stay away from it. I wish him all the best. We just had some disagreements afterwards, and you know, I wish him all the best. I hope he finds what happened there.
I'm tracking. You've had a very broad swath of different guests on, of a lot of different levels of a lot of different expertises. If that's a word. Expertise. You know,
let's go with expertise.
It just
my
sounds
kind of guy.
fancier.
Yeah.
You know, so with that, you know, again, with your background being pretty neutral as it relates to any government employment bias or, oh, I worked with that fucking agency and they're, you know, a bunch of clowns or, you know, whatever. I do think that you have a pretty unique perspective on all the different topics that you've covered over the years and different experts that you've had on. So I've got kind of a short list of just things that I'd like to get your opinion on, given that well-rounded view. Do you think that we'll ever see full transparency about Epstein's client list, or do you think that it's the ultimate political grenade that nobody wants to actually pull the pin on?
Absolutely not. We will never see it. It's also surreal. I'm sitting across from the guy who invented Epstein didn't kill himself.
To be fair, I don't look at it that way. I know it says
What do you mean you don't look at it that way? It's on tape.
No, but I'm not the first guy to have ever said that. I mean, there were people that maybe not were making a joke of it in that fashion or whatever to throw it in, you know, somewhere. But like that kind of viewpoint and skepticism of him not actually killing himself, you know, wasn't my idea, you know, but you don't think we'll ever see the list?
No.
Yeah. Why is that?
Long before this became a story again, you know, with some news on it this year, I had multiple different people off camera who don't know each other and come from totally different backgrounds tell me off the record, so I'm not going to say exactly what they said, but tell me we will never see those files, and here's why. All the same reason, resolutely, look at me in the eye. And so nothing has surprised me this year. I think all your favorite people have different degrees of guilt. Does that mean everyone involved with the guy was a pedo? Absolutely not. It does not. Jeffrey Epstein was a sick fuck. You have to look objectively as to how something like this happened when you're someone that sick, though, and you have to realize he, for a long time, was an effective spy. And one of the reasons he was an effective spy is because he knew all he had to do was get around you, take some pictures, shake some hands, exchange some phone calls on the record, send some emails, and you were dirty forever because he knew how dirty he was. The reality is he was clearly an intelligence operation. It was clearly not ours, and people can do the math on that one. But, you know, I think the truth that is really hard for a lot of us, including myself, to swallow is that this kind of thing is something that happens around the world, and many intelligence agencies, including our own, get involved in stuff like this sometimes. And I'm talking about the worst things in the worst ways that you don't talk about at dinner parties. And I'm really glad I'm not back in those seats making those decisions, because I would not be able to make those decisions. I mean, my decision would be the opposite. And maybe that would, by the way, be the right decision, not for nothing. But, you know, it really makes me sick, and some of the people I've talked to have put it in a really blunt way, and it's hard to disagree with them. And they're like, the world is just run by underground operations that espionage agencies around the world run on each other, and everything that happens up above ground is just collateral damage. And maybe that's oversimplified. I think some of that's oversimplified, but it's hard to disagree with that.
Well, so
sometimes.
what's the dot connecting with why it's not being released from those Anonymous sources.
Because Epstein, I was going to use the word touched. That wouldn't be good. Epstein had access to everyone across culture, from the Oval Office on down to the businesses and everything in between. And so people are like, well, a lot of these people are dead. No, a lot of these people are not dead. This is not that long ago. He was still doing this after he left jail or prison. What his little fucking office that he got to set up there in that sweetheart deal and leave every day to go work at his office in downtown West Palm Beach. It's like, you know, there's a quote that his brother said. His brother's a very suspicious character, to say the least. His brother said he was talking to Epstein about the 2016 election and the build up to it, and Epstein said to him, you know, if anyone knew what I knew about these people, they'd cancel the whole election. And I believe that. I really do. And
so it's as simple as it's an all or nothing thing. If you release, hey, this politician on this side, like there's too many from both sides or every entity to where it's like there's this almost, I don't want to say gentleman's agreement because they're not fucking gentlemen, but it's the, hey, if this name gets released, they're all getting fucking released. Yep. So if you don't want this guy to be fucking on the chopping block, then don't do it, or your guy's going to be on it.
Mike, here's how I'd put it. It's how things look. And this is the most controversial subject matter possible in society on how things look, which is whether or not someone is a pedo. You know who Josh Giddey is? Josh Giddey is an NBA player for the Chicago Bulls now. When he was on the Oklahoma City Thunder a couple years ago, it came out that he had slept with, at the time, a 15-year-old girl. So when I tell you that, you go, oh, he's a pedophile, right? What if I told you that he met that girl at a club where she was let into the club? And by the way, we've seen pictures of her when she was 15. She did not look 15. And she aggressively came after him and took him home under the illusion that she was 21 years old. Now look at that and ask yourself, intentionally, is the guy a pedophile? Absolutely not, he's not. Now, you could argue about him needing to be more careful with stuff, but then he's 20 years old at the time. You put yourself in your 20-year-old shoes or whatever. Some hot girl at the club's coming up to you, you're an NBA player. She's, you know, actually a girl, not a woman. You think she's a woman. And, you know, you have some drinks at a place that adults go to, and you take her home, and you have no idea about it until 2 years later it comes out with a Snapchat.
Yeah,
Josh,
I mean, the fact that, you know, there's a certain guard let down in that scenario, and that if you're in an establishment that you have to be 21 to get into, it's like there's going to be a natural assumption that anybody who's in there is at least fucking 21.
That's right. That's right. This is my point, though. Josh Giddey was called everything under the sun despite us knowing that information. People called him a pedo, people called him a kid fucker, all these different things. It's going to follow him around forever, despite the fact that I believe the guy didn't do anything wrong. I say that because including murder, like murder and pedophilia are like the two lowest things you can do in society. And there's something like sometimes more sinister about pedophilia than murder. And it's something that we have a 0 or 100 viewpoint on. And most of the time, I agree it's a 0 or 100 viewpoint view, and that's how it should be. But now think about this context, knowing how society looks at this. If you are a powerful figure, you run in powerful circles around hot women, and you go on this guy Jeff's flight, and there's a room in the back where you can fuck, and unbeknownst to you, everything down to the pen that's sitting on the counter in that room has a camera in it. And you go back there with 3 girls who say they're flight attendants. 2 of them are 25. The third one looks like she's their third twin sister, or triplet sister, but she's 16. And you have sex with all 3 of them on camera. And after the sex is done, the 16-year-old shows her driver's license, or she doesn't even have a driver's license, shows her ID on the camera, or it's proven in some way on that camera that she was a kid. And then the intelligence agency that collects that comes back to you and says, hey, pal, we got you. The context now doesn't matter. To society, you can explain, oh my God, no, these were 3 25-year-old flight. Nope. You fucked a kid. And I have a strong feeling that most of the people on Epstein's list were actually that and were not pedos. And then, yeah, there are definitely some people who were probably pedos. Your guess is as good as mine who most of those people were. But there is such a stigma with sex and particularly sexual crimes related to any child, someone who's underage, that society has, that once you're even in that air, they got you, bitch. And that is how I've thought about, I've looked at this case for so long, like many people out there listening have, and I've never thought we're going to see all of it, because he got around everyone and he was a schmoozer. You know, he wasn't this rocket scientist or anything like that. He tried to pretend he was to some people, but he was smart and he knew how to just get access to you. And you got to remember, Ghislaine is the son of a sociopath, you know, Robert Maxwell, who also was one of the most effective spies to ever live. Do you know how unbelievable it is? That guy was born on a kibbutz in the middle of, I forget, like Czechoslovakia. I don't even remember what country, somewhere in Europe. Escapes Europe when the Nazis are taken over at age 17. He's never spoken a lick of English. Within 5 years, not only, he goes to Britain, not only is he fluent in English, he speaks the king's, meaning he's got literally like the royal family's accent, one of the most strange accents in the world. So there's no like Czech or Yiddish in his background. Like, he speaks like a royal. And then he spied for multiple agencies, including Mossad, for the rest of his life. And there's a lot about him that makes it clear he was a monster outside of his job, to say nothing of his job. But, you know, his daughter, that was the apple of his eye. And she was very adept at getting into circles and saying the right things and getting people to like her. And she was the yin to Jeffrey's yang. And I just think they know way too much. Jeffrey knew way too much. And I mean, have you looked through the Black Book online? Mm-mm. Looked through that motherfucker so many times, man. Page 30, you got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. All right. Now, in my parents', and by the way, I like a lot of things RFK is doing right now, and I don't think RFK is a pedo, to be clear. But I went into my mom's office a few years ago, and at the bottom of one of the drawers is the old address book from when I was 5 years old, before we had phones, right? And you used to write in these things someone's name, their address, their email if they had one, their home phone number, and their cell phone number. And I had all 4 grandparents alive when this address book was written. And across my grandparents, all 4 of them, I think we had 4 emails, 4 cell phones, 2 home phones, and 3 addresses. So it was like 13 or 14 contacts across 4 people, the 4 closest people in my life to my parents. Their literal parents, right? Robert F. Kennedy has like 12 or 13 contacts in there. Addresses, emails, phone numbers. He has his wife at the time, she's deceased now, he has his wife's maid of honor's contact in there. I don't even know what that means. And the maid of honor happened to be Andrew Cuomo's wife. When I see stuff like that, you can't look at that and say there's not some sort of there. Again, that doesn't mean that he was a pedo or anything like that. But what compromising information that was manipulated even is there on a guy like that? And it's not just to pick on Robert F. Kennedy. I could go across the board with people up to the guy sitting in the Oval Office right now. You know, how many times did Epstein visit Clinton's Oval Office? 18 times that we know about. You know, Clinton went on the Lolita Express 27 times that we know about. I think that's actually accurate because you have to write down the flight manifest. But maybe they hit him a few times. I don't know. Your guess? I don't know how this works. I don't get on private jets. I'm scarred for life on private jets. I'm cool waiting for 2 hours in commercial because I don't know whose fucking jet I'm getting on. It's never been an option for me, to be clear. But when it becomes one, I'm very, very against that stuff just because you don't know. But it is so widespread that we talked about ancient Rome earlier and civilization falling in on itself. You have had a wealth gap form like a fucking V since the 1980s between the dwindling sized elites that get bigger and richer but smaller in size and the rest of America where the middle class has been legislated away. They've been sold a college lie. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. Inflation has taken away all their wealth. Their 401ks aren't even real anymore. Social Security is going to be something that it doesn't actually pay off for them, and they've had to pay into it the whole way. And they're getting larger and larger as a mass, while the upper people get smaller and smaller and more separated and away. I mean, I saw they're opening up a $36,000 a year initiation fee grocery store in New York City right now. Are you fucking kidding me? If you ever see me in a place like that, shoot me. You know, it's like society's angry. And when you give them the ultimate dog bone to chew on, like an Epstein thing, if you give them that whole bone, they're going to swallow it and choke on it. And we're never going to see it because of that. There's too many bodies that are buried. That's just my opinion.
No, I appreciate it. It's obviously well thought out and heavily researched. So just so that I understand correct, you are 100% confident that Epstein was a state-sponsored spy for some other country than the United States?
Most likely Israel, yes.
But you're 100% convinced that's the case?
I have to be fair and say 99%. But if I were speaking offhand, I'd say 100%. I'm a YouTuber, so you got to have some self-awareness here.
Wealth-wise, is it easy to connect those dots and say then that his billions or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in wealth came from that government and not from his business and investment savviness here in the United States?
So I've said this a couple times now, and I'd love for someone more capable than me to really pull on this thread, but I think about this one keeps me up at night. Tara Palmieri, who at the time was a reporter for Politico. She's now on her own on YouTube, but she's been, she worked at Politico, she worked at Puck News, she's been a White House correspondent. She did 2 series podcasts back in maybe 2019, 2020. One was basically called Epstein, the other one was basically called The Maxwells. And the only shame of it is that it wasn't on camera because they were both 8-part documentaries. She's going around with a microphone to the places, interviewing people, talking to victims, talking to lawyers, talking to people involved. The most insanely well executed, in my opinion, investigation of these situations ever done. And so I believe it was in the Maxwell's one. Maybe I'm misremembering that, and it was the Epstein one. Sorry. No, you know what? It was Epstein. Yeah. So she went around. Virginia Roberts Giuffre was a friend of hers who just passed away. Which, by the way, if we're going to be conspiratorial about all this stuff, we do have to be fair about this. Something that Tara reported after Virginia's death that did not get attention that should have. I'm not saying that this makes it 100%, but it's only fair we say this. When Virginia died of suicide, everyone said, oh, no, they killed another one. Virginia's family then chose to release pictures of her towards the end of her life that included her with the shit kicked out of her. And so Tara, she was now deceased, came out and said something to the effect of, I was told this off the record and kept it to myself because Virginia was not just a source, but she was a friend. But she confided in me about her husband beating the shit out of her and being in an abusive relationship. And so that was happening all over the place, and that may very well have contributed to what happened to her here, which we do have to say that. I'm not saying that doesn't mean someone didn't kill her because it would have been convenient to do so, but I do have to at least say that fairly. Anyway, she took Virginia around in this podcast, and they would go knock on, find people in Virginia that she would run into from her time with Epstein, and she'd say, hey, it's Virginia, remember me? And see if they could get him to talk. Adam Perry Lang, the famous chef, was one of them who was like, oh my God, I remember you, through him an intermediary and then wouldn't meet with them, which was interesting. But they went to, I believe his name was Juan Alessi, the house manager for Epstein, they went to his place. And he lived in a gated community now. And he said, oh my God, yes, come in. They go into the guy's kitchen and he agrees to let them interview him and record him, which credit to him for doing that. And it's one of the things that's so painful to listen to because you can hear, like when someone's stuck in a situation that's good for them and then they just don't see things because of that, but they still see the things and they put it away subconsciously. And then later they have guilt for it because they're like, fuck, did I see that? I did see that. That's him. And so he was getting like emotional talking about this, and you want to feel bad for him, but you're also like, how the fuck could you not have said something, my friend, But one of the things that he talked about that I felt was very revelatory, if that's even a word, was he said, I worked with Jeffrey in the 1980s, and he was well off. He lived in a nice place in the Upper East Side, but, nothing crazy. And then something happened in 1992, and he got the apartment, the famous one on East 71st Street. He got the plane. He started the plans to build in West Palm Beach. He had people in all the time. He got crazy, crazy wealth. And this is when he started to be known as someone worth $450 million. Hard to say. And I say this was very interesting to me because Robert Maxwell died. He did die, but, under suspicious circumstances in November 1991. He was buried on the Mount of Olives in Israel 5 days later, which is where they buried the highest level rabbis and state dignitaries. It was attended by multiple high-level people in the Israeli government. He clearly had worked for Mossad. And Robert Maxwell, say what you want about him, ran the Daily Mail and other businesses and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and was a massive narcissist and was probably killed out on that boat. When he died, he mysteriously left behind a $450 million pension scam on the Daily Mail that then his sons, who had nothing to do with it, had to stand trial for in the UK. They were found not guilty, by the way. Pretty crazy. They was probably stacked against them, yet they were found not guilty. Very conveniently, right before Jeffrey Epstein comes into that kind of net worth that he got surreptitiously through funneling from Leslie Wexner. Middleman, I don't know. Leslie Wexner, founder of L Brands. And so no one's ever pulled on that thread. I don't have a smoking gun that says, here's the payment process that happened where it went from here to here. But it's very convenient that they were able to say, oh yeah, this guy he actually ran a whole fraud. The fucking dude competing worldwide with Rupert Murdoch at the time is worth negative $400 million and is running a scam just to keep himself alive. I don't believe that for a second. I also, and this is where I have no proof. Now I'm really speculating. Let's be clear about that. But we've all just seen the scene in Godfather 2 when Tom Hagen, and if you haven't, sorry, you got to watch that movie, spoiler alert. But Tom Hagen goes and visits Frank Pentangeli at the prison where he was, he was going to be a witness and then decided not to be a witness in the moment against the mob. And so now he was still in prison awaiting what was going to happen to him. And Tom doesn't come up to him and say, Frank, you need to kill yourself or we're going to kill you and your whole family. They start talking about the Roman Empire and how when things went wrong, they would just open up their wrists, and it would go away. And what do you know? Frank Pentangeli kills himself before Tom Hagen shakes his hand like they have an understanding and says, all is forgiven, your family will be fine, just take care of business. And then he kills himself. I believe something like that probably happened with Robert Maxwell. He had run his course. He was a loud guy. He was a controversial guy. He was a guy that eventually his narcissism was going to outweigh his ability to be an effective spy. And I think there was probably a conversation like that happened. And I think he was too much of a raging megalomaniacal narcissist to actually kill himself. And so I think he said, fuck you, and took a trip onto, the West African islands with his yacht. Said, I'm going to get away. And then they said, well, he's not doing it, so we're going to do it to him. And then I think they funneled his money from him to Epstein. That's my theory. I'd love to see someone pull on it.
And who is they in that?
In that case, that would be some form of, I believe, Israeli intelligence.
Yeah. Have you had anybody on your show that has provided a counter narrative or has argued with you about that?
Oh, yeah. So I've had people argue that he was just an access agent, and I think there's reasonable arguments there. You have to look at the other side at what things could be. It's not all this thing. And like we also, it's so easy right now because of what's going on in Gaza to just pick on everything with Israel and then, turn up a blind eye and assume that us and other intelligence agencies don't do things like this. They do. Everyone's guilty here. It doesn't make it right, to be clear. But I think that has to be said. But yeah, I've had people talk about him just being an access agent because he had a sick fetish, but not a fetish, he had a sick criminal, whatever that is, and was a pedophile. And so, he was useful in being able to blackmail people for the right price, that kind of thing. And I think there's something there. I've had people argue that he was CIA. I think you have to look at what was said to Alexander Acosta in 2008, where, he allegedly was told he's intelligence, he's above you, where the assumption could be that maybe he was CIA. I just have always thought the Maxwell thing is too much for me to overlook. That is, when I really look at it, that's probably the only reason I say it was most likely Israel. It'd be easy to say, well, Epstein was Jewish. It's not that easy. I mean, if you have a lot of Jewish friends, a lot of them don't fuck with Israel either. Doesn't mean he didn't. He seemed to have liked Israel. But it's more, I try to look at it like, who was he around? Who was introducing him to people at the beginning? Who were they tied to? And Maxwell was absolutely tied to them. And his death and the fact that then his daughter got to live off of that Epstein's wealth afterwards, that's very interesting. He didn't like women that age. It's just, it's strange to me, but yeah, I can't, like I sat here and I said 99% to you because I feel strongly about it. But that's why I have to say 99% and not 100% because I could be totally fucking wrong. Period.
Yeah. There's also, a Candace Owens element of theorizing that it's a state sponsor kind of thing from the left as a gun grab. Do you buy into any of that? What do you think is going on? Do you think that that's a component to it at all?
I don't know. If it is, it's sick. I'll comment strongly on stuff that at least I've researched. Again, doesn't mean I'm right at all, but at least I can say here's pieces I have to it. I haven't done enough work on that. The work I've done in researching mass shootings and things like that has much more to do with the stuff we talked about earlier, which is like
psychotropic drugs.
And what are the variables that's making people do this thing? Could there be Manchurian whatever that, I don't know, some sort of psyop that causes someone to shoot people? Hey, could be. I don't know. I try to be really careful with jumping to conclusions on stuff, and I fall short on that, obviously, sometimes. But this is one of those that it's like, it doesn't mean that the people you're citing are right, but I don't know.
We've covered a lot of topics today, but you've also had a lot of guests on that I am curious. Are there any topics we haven't covered that you find are relevant and that you want to talk about, and or is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
Covered a lot of things I'm sure I could think of a million things because we don't have, fucking 72 straight hours to talk, but we've covered a wide range today, man. I would have expected anything less for sure. It's been great. It's been nice to also work out some stuff too. It's helpful sometimes to sit in this seat and have to work out arguments logically, and we'll see how people respond to that as well, to see where there's some holes in some things I say where I could be better, or some stuff where I have it ironed out pretty decently. I think that's always a big help.
Yeah. Well, good shit. Well, I do have some parting gifts for you.
Oh, thank you.
And, being a fan of Rome, you can appreciate some Marcus Aurelius quotes on
I
the
love
coin.
some Marcus Aurelius quotes.
And since you're Irish, it opens from the bottom of the front.
Is that an Irish thing?
Just color matching wise.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, got your little, welcome to Texas, mic drop, shit kicker belt buckle.
Yeah, it's a belt or a WWE belt.
Yeah.
I like it. It says mic drop on it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
It's very cool. It's a real honor to be invited on.
Well, it was an honor having you again. I applaud just how serious you take your craft, and I just think you do a marvelous job interviewing, and I was really impressed when I was on your show. Plan on coming back again, which we'll work out after this. But I really appreciate the job that you do, the people that you have on, and how deep you dig into the guests and their stories and follow-up questions and everything. And I appreciate you taking the time to come all the way here and share your story.
Thank you very much. This is actually my first time in Texas, too.
No shit.
So, cool.
Yeah, that's wild. Well,
the job gets to take you some cool places.
That's a case of beer, first time.
Yeah.
So that's a military thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. To the viewer, I hope you enjoyed it. I know I sure did. If you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.